Chapter 873. 46 hours ago, Ingzhou. It was 23:05 in the morning, and it was drizzling. Outside Kobe Jinling Street, a car with a Dongbua license plate quietly stopped at the intersection. The young man in the back pushed open the door and unhurriedly held up an umbrella. When he raised his slightly young face, it was illuminated by the flashing neon lights in the distance. In front of the street, 2 rows of burly men in suits did not hold umbrellas. They were bathed in the rain and had serious expressions. They shouted and bowed respectfully to greet the guests. Wow, so ostentatious. The cabin in the woods whistled and laughed. Does it have to be so grand when we're having a meal with our own family? Someone got out of the car from the passenger seat. The middle-aged man's style was particularly strange. He was wearing sportswear, but there was a crooked tachi on his waist. His face was unshaven, his hair curled up, and his back was hunched. He looked like an old monkey. Following behind the young man, he grinned at the welcoming guests on both sides. The cigarette at the corner of his mouth fell to the ground and was stepped on. Just like that, he swaggered into the heart of the 6He society with the young man. Walking through the quiet long street, under the gaze of countless people, they stepped through the vermilion main door, passed through the hall, and went straight forward. They were so familiar with it that it was as if they were going home. Along the way, Lin Shurjo smiled warmly, and even greeted the acquaintances who came and went. However, this time, those who were full of enthusiasm in the past had become a little forced. They all retreated and did not dare to say much. Moreover, outside the hall, in the open space waiting, the expressions of the additional unfamiliar faces were not quite the same. There were people from Xinluo with tattoos, people from the Russian Federation in sportswear, and people from Ingzhou in suits and leather shoes like office workers. There were bronze-skinned Americans and even pitch-black Egyptians. Those outsiders who were clearly separated from each other were smoking and chatting. There were old and young, men and women. They were all different. However, without exception, there was a kind of cruel aura on them. It was like a beast mixed in the crowd. When they heard the approaching footsteps in the distance, their eyes became unfriendly. The old monkey behind Lin Shurjo scratched his cheeks. The cabin in the woods ignored it and continued to move forward. Their journey was smooth and unimpeded. Until the last gate, he was stopped by the arm of a blood relative. The middle-aged man with his arms crossed leaned against the door and looked at Lin Shurjo. He raised his hand and motioned for Lin Shurjo to open his arms. Do we still need to search him, Brother 11? Little Hut in the woods widened his eyes in confusion. So distant. Lin Shi curled his lips and said, 6th granduncle said that we can search anyone except for little 19. If there is another badger game, he won't be able to stand it. How could I? Ha ha. The little hut in the forest shrugged innocently and allowed his cousin to search it. Teacher is not here. Even if I have explosives all over my body, I can't hurt 6th granduncle, can I? Brother 11 didn't answer. He carefully searched him from head to toe. Finally, he let go of his hand and patted him on the shoulder. Then, he stepped aside and opened up a path. The old monkey with the saber wanted to follow, but Brother 11 raised his hand and stopped him. The middle-aged man's smile was gentle as he reminded, unauthorized personnel are not allowed to enter. Thank you. I'm a carrier. Old monkey raised its eyes and explained seriously. Lin Shi didn't say anything. He just looked at him with a smile. Old monkey also smiled and looked at his neck. The fingers on his waist flicked. It was as if they were jumping on the invisible piano keys. They looked at each other silently until the little hut in the forest in front of the door. He turned back and said, "Don't worry, Elder Ju Chuan. It's just a family drinking tea. 6th Granduncle won't hurt me, right? The second half of the sentence was said to the smoky room. In the room, the atmosphere was tense. The long table was already filled with guests from all over the place. Smoke lingered on each of their cold and gloomy faces. Only the old man at the end of the long table was still smiling kindly. "What are you talking about? My little 19 is in sixth granduncle's territory. Who can hurt you?" So the smile in the hut in the forest became more and more cheerful. He walked into the hut and closed the door. He swaggered off his coat and hung it on the hanger. Then he sat on the last chair at the end of the long table. He looked up at the faces around him. Some were familiar, some were unfamiliar. He greeted them warmly. "Is everyone here so early? Have you eaten? Don't just drink tea when you're old. It's bad for your stomach." No one responded. The hut in the forest didn't expect to get an answer. He propped up his chin without embarrassment and looked at them. The third in command of the K-Gang, Red-Nose Ronnie, the Illuminati's Archbishop Kenichi Nomahara, the Nuji Group's representative, Jinquan City, the Big Circle's Red Stickchin Lebo, the American Mafia's old godfather, Johnson, Egypt's drug magnate, Silas, all the famous leaders of the underworld of the capital were gathered here today. Even the unexpected people in the hut in the forest. He raised his eyes and looked at the seat beside sixth granduncle. It was an old woman in a suit with a graceful bearing. "Is fourth aunt here too? Isn't that right?" Fourth aunt smiled kindly. "I heard that little 19 is doing well. Old master was worried and asked me to come and take a look. Don't worry, I'm here. No one can hurt you today. Then I'll have to rely on fourth aunt's blessing." Lynn, 19, chewed the grapes in the fruit plate and let out a long breath. "Otherwise, with such a big lineup, I don't feel confident. Hey, why don't I see Mr. Luishima? And old lady Sada, wasn't she fine the last time? Why didn't she come today? She can't be angry, right?" After a short moment of silence, everyone's expression turned ugly. "They're dead." Big Jean coldly glanced at the seemingly innocent young man. "One was yesterday, and the other was this morning. They were both killed by an old monkey-like swordsman. Don't tell me you've forgotten?" The hut in the forest was stunned and couldn't help but pat his head. "Look at my memory." He smiled awkwardly. "I saw that you were still alive, so I thought they were safe too. I forgot. As soon as he said that, everyone's expression became ferocious. They were furious. If sixth granduncle, who was hosting the meeting, didn't suddenly raise his eyes and forcibly suppress the restless, murderous intent, perhaps there would be people in the hall who would draw their swords to fight to the death. "Little 19, everyone knows that you've been fierce recently. There's no need to show off here. Give sixth granduncle some face. And say less." Okay. Lynn 19 shrugged, helplessly. He tilted his head and spat out grape seeds on the ground. He said casually, "If you didn't ask me, I wouldn't want to come today. It's meaningless to come here. I can't tell you the reason. If we quarrel, it will be embarrassing." "How can you know if you don't talk about it?" Sixth granduncle picked up the teacup and took a sip. He kindly suggested, "Everyone just wants to do business. There's no need to make a big fuss because of some trivial misunderstanding, right? To be honest, now that it's to the extent of a full-scale war, I'm also under a lot of pressure." The hut in the forest shook his head. "You're all famous big shots. We're living a good life. No one wants to put their hands in other people's pot. However, the census of Donbua and the census of mixed race were arranged by my teacher before he left. As a student, I can only nod and carry out his orders. How can I make irresponsible remarks?" He clapped his hands and defended himself innocently. "You see, this is my teacher's task. Why do you have to make things difficult for me, a henchman, right?" With a simple flick of his wrist, he threw the blame to outer space. as if he wasn't the one who killed the whole family a few days ago. Feeling those angry eyes, Lin 19 was thick-skinned, grinned, and showed a sincere expression. "Everyone, give me some face. How about sending those beastmen to register? Anyway, after being a tool for so many years, there's nothing to live for. Just treat it as a good thing, and let them bask in the sun for a few more days, okay?" He put his hands together and suggested again, "Think about it, okay? Just treat it as doing good deeds." For the past few days, the entire underground world of the capital was in chaos. The war that lasted for more than a month, the fights that didn't see blood, and the fights that saw blood but couldn't see the light of day all started because of this. From the beginning of the census of Donbua to the registration of mixed race, and even the protection of human rights, every decision issued by the branch was fiercely digging meat into the pot of everyone here, whether it was the processing and trafficking of forbidden drugs, the mining of illegal precious metals, the urgently needed experimental products in various underground laboratories, and even the custom industries, usury, food processing, and so on. The existence of every cheap human resource was the cornerstone of the city in the shadows. No matter who it was the normal that was difficult to shake. This was not something that could be changed by the rise of Donbua's inner circle. If they acted rashly, it would only make the predators in the muddy water react. Therefore, it wasn't hard to imagine what had happened. It was as if they had become everyone's enemy in an instant. They hit a wall everywhere and became the enemy of the whole world. From the initial moderation, followed by the probing, then the friction, and the final outbreak, the blood washed the places that light couldn't find again and again. Clearly, the order of peace had just ended, and a full-scale war was about to come again. Everyone stood at the edge of the cliff. She scrutinized that slightly young face and his smile, but they didn't respond. Sixth great uncle stayed out of it and didn't say a word. He just drank tea quietly. As a mediator, he had done his best. Whether the next thing would succeed or not, it had nothing to do with him. But the other people's eyes soon faintly looked at the seat of honor, the middle-aged woman with a kind smile next to sixth great uncle, who was like a clay puppet. In fact, everything has not reached the point of life and death. Fourth aunt finally opened her mouth and said with a smile, "In Jianghu, don't hurt the harmony if you can. Little 19 is young, and it is the time for him to make a contribution. Everyone here is his uncles, and you should help him as much as you can. Since Donbua wants it, let's put together the mixed race in our hands and give half to Donbua." Her soft Ingzhou dialect was indescribably pleasant to the ears. However, when she glanced at the people below with her slender phoenix eyes, there was a faint trace of coercion in her gaze. Sixth great uncle still didn't say a word and just drank tea silently. But the palpitating oppression lingered in everyone's hearts, and their expressions changed. Motherf asterisk her, asking for half of it the moment he opened his mouth. This was completely different from what they had agreed on. The people of the Lin family were really inhumane. But now that things had come to this, they could either die together or give up half of their illegal accounts. What other choice did they have? After a short silence, everyone finally made a decision. "In that case, let's do it this way." The first to speak was the dark-skinned Egyptian, Silas. In his chemistry lab, the mixed race who grew herbs and made medicine were the fastest to change. Giving half of it to the old, weak, sick, and disabled would not hurt their foundation. On the contrary, Red-Nosed Ronnie's expression changed. Recently, more than half of the profits from the mixed race smuggling in Yasaka were in their hands. Suddenly asking him to give it up was like cutting off his flesh. But the situation was beyond his control. Seeing that everyone was nodding slowly, and even the people of the Illumination cult had chosen to submit, what could he do? He could only grit his teeth and nod. After a short silence, Lin 19 looked at those faces and finally let out a long breath. Finally, he looked at the seat of honor. He still wasn't sure. Ant 4, you can make the decision. Half. The graceful woman nodded indifferently. Don't worry. As long as there's one less, Ant 4 will compensate you. Then, the cabin in the forest laughed. He looked around again. Is that what everyone thinks? For a moment, everyone nodded. They did not want to complicate things at this time. Since that's the case, let's have a cup of tea. In the entire conference room, at the long table, the only young man who had the right to war laughed. He took the lead to raise his teacup and saluted from afar. Let's forget about today's matter. How about it? In the face of his invitation, those gloomy faces, which were originally grief-stricken, also squeezed out a happy smile, wanting to end this as soon as possible. As for the future, there was still a long way to go. There was always a debt to be settled slowly. Just like that, in the dense fragrance of tea, everyone's laughter became kind and harmless. It was joyous and harmonious. Regardless of whether they were inexperienced or skilled, they all drank the tea in their cups to show the establishment of the alliance. Finally, the cabin in the forest put down the teacup in his hand. He wiped his mouth. He said, "Then let's fight." Along with his words, a faint roar could be heard. In the distant city that was shrouded in rain, a sudden burst of fire could be seen. The moment he made the decision, from Kyoto to Osaka, from Yomiuri to the distant Tsushima, Shikishima, and Hokkaido, countless huge vehicles rushed out of the darkness. In the carriages that were pushed open, there were Jidao who had been waiting for a long time with swords and sabers in their hands, attacking their scheduled opponents. A full-scale war had arrived at this moment. Ear-piercing alarms burst out from the headquarters of the 6 gang, and sharp screams came from outside the door. For a moment, everyone's expression changed, including Ant 4, who had been smiling just now. Those big shots whose expressions suddenly changed pulled out their weapons in an instant and aimed at the face of the cabin in the forest. At this time, they were furious. Even Uncle 6, who was drinking tea, froze in place. He looked up with his pitch-black eyes. The leader of the Road of Sin looked down indifferently at the brat who was making trouble in front of him. "Little 19, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Uncle 6. In front of those muzzles, the cabin in the forest tilted his head, lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth, and blew the smoke casually. "The mediation meeting is over. The peace talks have failed. I've drunk the tea to send the guests away. What else can I do?" He grinned with a mocking smile. "Of course, I'm going to fight." In the dead silence, another pair of cold eyes looked at him. "Little 19, are you kidding me?" Ant 4's smile disappeared. That graceful face became cold and gloomy without the color of a living person. There was only a pale white color, like ashes that had been burned out. Her long hair curled and wriggled like a snake, choosing to devour people. Or have you grown up and become successful, and you don't even care about fourth Ant? Ant 4, what are you talking about? I didn't mean to offend you. Lin 19 took off the cigarette in confusion and put it out in his hand. You see, I'm very grateful for your care. I agree with your idea of peace, and I especially agree with your idea. But here's the only problem. He raised his finger and pointed at himself. He looked at his elder and asked in confusion, "When the F*CK, did I say that I only want half?" At that moment, his respect disappeared. A ferocious flame burst out of his eyes, and cruelty rose. "I came here today because I respect you as an elder, but who do you think you are? Since when did you have the right to talk about things in Jingdu?" Behind him, the door suddenly broke. It seemed to be cut off by an invisible sword. A figure in a mess fell in. He staggered back, supporting himself on the table, and almost couldn't get up. Lin Shi, who was guarding outside the door, opened his mouth and spat out blood. He raised his broken right arm and pointed at the figure who came in from outside the door. It was the warrior with curly hair and beard, who looked like an old monkey. His loose sportswear had been stained red with blood, and it became so sad, full of cracks and gunshot wounds. The blood that flowed down the face could not hide the darkness underneath. Cursed livor mortis spread on his face. He still didn't dare to smile. He endured the killing intent of his sixth granduncle and walked into the hall step by step. He tilted his head and said to the young man next to him, "Everything outside has been taken care of, but your cousin accidentally cut off his hand." She glanced at his cousin, who was in a mess, and looked away indifferently. The surgeons of the Lin family are the best in Dongsha. As long as he's still alive, he'll be fine after a few days of rest. On the table next to him, Lin Shi suddenly roared and propped himself up, trying to grab him. But then a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his face tightly, pressing him onto the table as if he was a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. It was as steady as an iron clamp, not allowing him to move at all. It was Lin Shi. "Everyone, you came to talk to me, and I talked to you. You wanted to have tea with me, and I drank it. You wanted sincerity, and I gave it to you, but what did you say to me?" Half. Ignoring his cousin's other hand, he raised his blood-stained face, looked around at everyone here, and said word by word, "I came all the way here. King came all the way here. Do you think I'm a beggar in the charity hall? Today, I'll say it for the last time here. Hand over the bastards in your hands. Either all of them, or die." He pulled out the snow-white blade from his bosom. With a swing of his hand, he nailed it onto the long table. A buzzing sound rang out, illuminating the stiff faces. "And you, sixth granduncle," the ferocious young man raised his eyes and looked indifferently at the old man at the end of the long table. Like a young snake flicking its tongue at a python, there was the same darkness and brutality. "If you want territory and want to reach out to Donbua, you can talk to me. Why did you push the idiot in the family to talk to you? You have to remember, no matter how many people die today, and how much we lose, it's all because of Fourth Aunt's stupidity." A shrill scream sounded. Blood spurted out, because the hand holding the knife suddenly pressed down. The sharp knife cut a deep crack on the table and cut off his cousin's other hand. A severed hand flew up and fell in front of Fourth Aunt's furious face. The 5 fingers were still twitching, and it was futile to ask for help. Below, the young man with the knife glanced at her face, no longer hiding his disdain and disgust. "Wearing a suit and tie, what's the use of holding a mobile phone? Huh. Eat shit." Chapter 874. The color of blood flew up and fell down silently. It seemed that even the wailing sound had disappeared. In the dead silence, Forrest Hutt didn't look at Fourth Aunt's dead face. He didn't even care if she would lose her composure in her rage and kill him. From the beginning, she was not the focus at all. She was not the opponent he was here to deal with today. Even if she was tricky, she was completely insignificant compared to the real problem. At this moment, the real leader was sitting at the head of the table, holding a teacup. He sat there calmly and indifferently glanced at the younger generation's mischief and comical counterattacks. He was the real backbone of the Lin family, the elder, the pillar, and one of the masters of the shadow world in Southeast Asia. He had been the leader of the 6 He Association since 50 years ago. Lin Wei was not afraid of Old Dragon. Wasn't all of this caused by him as well? Fourth Aunt, that idiot, just smelled the benefits and wanted to pick the fruit with her stupid son. He didn't object because he wanted a brainless person to take his place and test the bottom line of the Donbua inner circle. He hadn't given up yet. After missing the opportunity given by his teacher, He still wanted to negotiate. He wanted to take back what he had missed. He wanted to use this opportunity to break through that invisible glass ceiling and extend the destiny of his evil karma into the darkness of the capital. He wanted to take another step forward. But the Dambwa inner circle had already been established. If he wanted to achieve something, he had to shake their current situation and make the Dambwa inner circle willingly ask for help from him and accept his help. Therefore, he was not afraid of making a big deal out of it, or even a full-scale war, because the bigger the trouble, the more precious the power of the 6 association would be. But Fourth Aunt didn't understand. She had been doing shady business for too long. She thought that they were all gangsters, and harmony was the most important thing when making money. She thought that she could negotiate on behalf of Forest Hut and express goodwill to him. But without any conditions, this was not something she could negotiate. She didn't think clearly. Doing things in the light was different from doing things in the dark. From the beginning, Dambwa had no intention of negotiating, and there was never a half. Either all or death. Either Dambwa Inner Circle completely settled the census and registration of the mixed race, or it would all fail and fall back to the time before the Alliance era. Half. He didn't even need half. As long as someone stood out and said that Danbo was nothing and that he was not going to hand it over, he was not going to have Asterisk King take him seriously, then it would be equivalent to them losing. The long period of hard work, the teachers' efforts, and the sacrifices of so many people had all failed miserably. It turned into a joke. It would become an eternal stain on his teacher's name, a humiliation that could never be washed away by the small house in the forest. The cabin in the woods understood this. 6th granduncle also understood. Therefore, at that moment, the old man shook his head and sneered disdainfully. Finally, he put down the teacup in his hand. He raised his eyes. Since Lin Shurgyo was born, this was the first time that she looked at him so seriously. She was solemn and cold, without any warmth. Because this was normal, this was the best. Warm, harmonious, and friendly things had never been the core of the Lin family. They were born to be cold-blooded creatures. When he greeted with a smile, there was no warmth in his eyes. Only when it came to his core etiquette would he tear off his disguise and reveal his true face. Therefore, the entire meeting room froze in an instant. Darkness rolled. An invisible evil gushed out like a tide, shrouding, locking, and freezing everyone in the air. In Lin Wei's fearless empty shell, boiling malice rubbed against each other. Those sharp voices overlapped and turned into disappointed sighs. Little 19, you are getting more and more outrageous. Why? The cabin in the woods grinned and asked, 6th granduncle, do you want to discipline me on behalf of my great-grandfather? I'm afraid the patriarch won't care either. When he let you out, he probably already saw this day coming. He has high hopes for you, but he doesn't want you to succeed. 6th granduncle sneered. Look, as he wishes. You are just like your teacher. The cabin in the woods smiled more happily. Isn't this good? Not good. At that moment, the boiling malice no longer concealed its mockery and viciousness, as well as killing intent, because you always don't learn like him. The old man sighed, hoarsely, because you still have a long way to go. Little 19, you learned his appearance, but you didn't learn his true strength. I really miss it. This scene is just like when you were a child, imitating the heroes of justice on TV in front of the whole family. That kind of naive fantasy, that kind of imitation, and that completely clueless look. They thought that doing it this way was right, that doing it this way was good, but they never thought that the things on TV had always been a fantasy. At that moment, 6th granduncle grinned, and countless sticky darkness suddenly extended from his old body. The python monster covered in red scales turned solid and coiled around the entire meeting room. No, the entire Jinling Street. Just by raising his eyes silently, he extinguished the countless neon lights in the night sky. The thin rain rolled back in panic and rushed into the sky. The dark clouds in the sky were torn apart, but there was no starlight, and the huge pressure had crushed the ceiling, pillars, and even the floor of the 6E Society, causing countless cracks to appear. It was just a weak circulation, but it had already turned into the main axis of the world, causing all fragile beings to linger at the edge of the cliff. In the end, the red-scaled serpent that seemed to want to devour the heavens, and the earth lowered its eyes and indifferently spat out its venomous tongue. It looked down at the young man's face that was gradually losing its color. He lowered his eyes mockingly. "Pretentious? You're here with me? Would it work? Little 19, the old man asked mockingly. What are you waiting for after wasting so much time? Weren't they supposed to be reinforcements? Reinforcements from the dojo? An expert from Danbois? The expression of the hut in the forest suddenly changed. In his arms, the originally warm Imperial Guard had already lost its warmth. The communication was cut off. This was because a huge shadow had turned into a giant screen that soared into the sky. From the outside to the inside, it completely enveloped the entire Yoshimi Yosaka, covering every single exit. It was isolated from the outside world. His cold gaze blocked everything. The same seal had also enveloped Kobe today. That was a foreshadowing that was laid long before the meeting. No, half a month, or even a month ago. The old man had prepared for today's meeting. At this moment, at this place, he was already under the serpent's mouth. Now, there's only you and me here, little 19. At the end of the long table, behind the boiling teapot, the old man announced coldly, "If you were your teacher, you would draw your sword regardless of the consequences, because the enemy is right in front of you." He said, "Now, the sword is in your hand. You make the choice." In the silence, the hut in the forest did not speak. He just held the sword in his hand tightly, the veins on the back of his hand bulging, until the blade could no longer bear the burden, and a crack appeared on it. It wailed silently. Finally, he let go of his hand and collapsed on the chair, exhausted. "Did you see that? Little 19. Lin Wei shook his head in disappointment. "This is the difference between you and your teacher, because your confidence has never come from yourself." In this way, he exposed the nature of the young man in front of him mercilessly. "You've always counted on others to succeed, but you're not willing to sacrifice yourself. You pretend to be fearless, charging at the front, but leaving the outcome in the hands of others. Your courage only comes from your supporters. After losing everything, you don't even have the backbone to fight. But what are you doing here, hot in the forest? What are you thinking?" Lin Wei was not afraid, and he questioned sternly, "Do you think that the killing of blood relatives is a joke?" Even though the same blood flowed in their bones, even though there were so-called kinship and blood ties between each other, even though most of the time the family was one. But the rules of the Lin family were as straightforward and naked as the path of evil karma itself. This path was too narrow. It could not tolerate any offense or a second discordant voice. Sometimes it could not even allow one more person to walk. The killing of blood relatives was nothing new. It was almost becoming a tradition. "Now, let's talk, little 19. I want to talk to you." Under the red-scaled serpent, the ferocious old man lowered his eyes and looked down coldly. "You came to my place and thought that you could rest easy with the sword of the sword saint. You drank my tea and accepted my kindness, but you killed my guest, disturbed my rules, and even stepped on my face. But do you really think that sixth granduncle is so old that he doesn't dare to kill?" He picked up the teacup filled with venom, took a sip of the fragrance of rust, and asked cruelly, "Give me a reason not to kill you." Either admit defeat or die. Once the killing of blood relatives began, the result was so simple. And at that moment, on the other side of the long table, under the strangulation of the red-scaled serpent, the dying projection of Shang Qing dissipated silently. In the dead silence, the shoulder of the hut in the forest shook. It was as if he was laughing. He said, "Because you can't kill me." The young man raised his head and looked at his granduncle. With difficulty, he smiled and told him word by word, "Because I'm right." In that instant, a formless power burst forth from the frail body and ignited the flames once again. It made the young man raise his neck and stare at the opponent in front of him. He told him, "You can't kill me." The hut in the forest said, "Because I came here not only as the little 19 of the Lin family, but also as a representative of my teacher, the inner circle of Donbua, and all the beast men." It was like all the heroes who faced the powerful villains on TV. Even if they were standing on the edge of the cliff, facing death and despair, they could still hold their heads high and say, "I represent justice. You can't kill me. You can't kill me either." He raised his hand, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and told him with absolute certainty, "Because the general trend is with me." At that moment, the entire Jinling village suddenly shook. Everything shrouded in the shadow of evil shook for an instant, because something discordant had invaded, something insignificant had arrived. Facing the endless darkness and terrifying pressure, step by step, they walked into this hell of despair. Someone had arrived, holding a candle flame. Even if the light was so small, in the east, in the west, in the south, in the north, in all directions. An old man with 2 horns on his head, a middle-aged man covered in white hair like a cloak, a woman with skeletal wings on her back, a young man with 4 eyes, a husband and wife holding hands, a fat and bloated man who seemed to be gasping for breath, a total of 16 ascendants. 16 beast men from Donbua, the border, Ingzhou, America, the Russian Federation, Egypt, and even hell. Some were so powerful that they could shake this pitch-black shadow hell. Some were so small that they were not worth mentioning. And some were already trembling just by standing here. They came here today for the same purpose as the hut in the forest, for the future described by the Donbua he represented. "Do you see, 6th uncle? You can't kill me." The hut in the forest smiled. "I spent more than half a month painstakingly visiting each and every one of them to ask for help, persuading with kind words, tempting with benefits, moving with emotions, explaining with reason, betraying his dignity, paying the conditions, guaranteeing promises. He had gone through so much trouble, made a fool of himself, and suffered enough. He had succeeded a lot, but he had failed even more. In the end, he had received an insignificant amount of help. Each of them will not hesitate to die in order to protect me. He said, "This is my last reinforcement. I have the confidence to be your enemy." At this moment, the young man spread out his hands and faced his enemy frankly. "6th uncle is right. I can't learn the teacher's things no matter how hard I try. I can't learn them, but there are always things that I understand a little. Although I don't have courage or ability, as long as I find someone who is reliable enough, I can occasionally succeed." Right? He was so confident, even if his strength was not worth mentioning compared to the old man in front of him. There was a great disparity in victory and defeat between them. No, not to mention victory and defeat. With 6th uncle's experience and strength, the moment he made a move, these people would usher in a crushing defeat and death, right? But it didn't matter. If he didn't have the courage, he would give the courage to someone with courage. If he didn't have the ability, he would find someone more suitable than himself. If he couldn't win, then he would leave the victory and defeat in the hands of others. Now, I leave the victory and defeat in 6th uncle's hands. At this moment, the young man who represented the Dombo faction and all the mixed races raised his eyes and asked, "So, are you satisfied with this reason?" Now, the hut in the forest was no longer the only one who was fearless in the face of Lin Wei. Even without the help of the dojo and the strong masters of the ivory tower, from the beginning, it didn't matter. When he came those were just icing as the messenger of his teacher and the messenger of the Dombo faction, he was no longer purely representing himself. All the beast characteristics who yearned for order and hope in the present realm, the border, and even hell, all the people who yearned for the future stood behind him. He was afraid of death, but he was not afraid of failure and war because the conflict between the two sides was never on the same level. War under the sun was not the same as fighting in the dark, no matter how great the benefits were, compared to the hope that was finally close at hand after 100 years of suffering. It was not worth mentioning. When Huai Shi personally hammered the first nail in the Dombo faction, the rolling momentum had already begun to move. This was a destined struggle. Those benefits that could not be exposed, those goals that could not be resorted to under the sun, even if the entire extreme Tao of Yingzhou and the entire dark world of Southeast Asia united, were not worth mentioning in comparison. Even if Lin Wei was the one blocking the way, it would be the same. They could only lie dormant in the dark, and the path of evil karma could not compete with the new order. Once Lin Wei was not afraid to kill those people here, the Dombo faction would completely blow the horn of war. At that time, not only the ivory tower behind them, even the Yingzhou lineage and the Central Bureau would not stay out of it. And before that, the Sixi faction would become the enemy of all mixed races, the stumbling block on their road to freedom. Now, it's your turn to answer me. The little hut in the forest raised his head and asked softly, "Sixth uncle, do you want to settle your grudges quickly? Or do you want to live forever?" Dead silence. In the long dead silence, the red-scaled serpent stared coldly at the young man in front of him. The old man behind the long table did not speak, but just looked at his face, as if to confirm something. "You really don't look like your teacher, little 19. The old man poured the remaining tea in his hand into the teapot, letting the dark venom silently flow away. As if mocking himself, he chuckled softly. "But you don't look like a member of the Lin family. Are you a traitor or a rebel? Is this not good?" The little hut in the forest asked again. "No, this is good," Lin Wei said fearlessly. "At least it proves that you've grown up. You're strong enough to be independent. You've done very well. Better than me. No, better than your great-grandfather when he was young. If he knew, he would be happy for you." "Will sixth uncle be happy for me?" "Not at all." The old man sighed, regretfully. "When I think of such a freak and variable in the family, I want to kill you even more. I should have done it so earlier. Vicious, that kind of killing intent was genuine. With such talent and determination, if he had witnessed why the birth couldn't he use of a black sheep for the right way? He had witnessed the old man lowered his eyes of a disaster and suddenly asked, "You want all of it?" "All of it." "Well, then go and get it yourself." In the shadow of the dissipating serpent, the old dragon of the six, he society said indifferently, "I'll give you a chance. How much you can get depends on your own ability." The little hut in the forest's face froze and immediately became cold. "Sixth uncle, are you questioning my determination?" "No, I'm just questioning your ability." Lin Wei was not afraid and said coldly, "You have to let others see if your ambition is worthy of what you say. This is your problem." He said, "Do your own thing. Take care of your own mess." The old man waved his hand coldly and threw a box from the other end of the long table. It fell in front of him, rolled, opened, and something wrapped in brocade rolled out. The little hut in the forest froze in place. He couldn't believe it and didn't understand what had happened. Rules are rules. This is the last principle I'll teach you as sixth uncle. If I can't kill you, I've already lost. The old man propped himself up with his walking stick and looked at him one last time. He turned and left. The darkness rolled and dissipated. For most people, it was as if they had just had a long nightmare. When the nightmare suddenly dissipated and they returned to reality, their consciousness seemed to be still in the endless darkness. They were sweating profusely and gasping for breath. When all the participants looked around with pale faces and looked at each other in shock, they found that the old man who had been sitting at the head of the table had disappeared. The blood was still on the table and the surrounding walls. The fragrance of malice and the smell of rust still lingered in the air. In the blink of an eye, they suddenly realized what had just happened. But when they raised their weapons full of hostility and aimed at the young man below, the dull woman at the head of the table looked as if she had seen a ghost. Her face was distorted. She couldn't help but scream. "Lynn Sherjo, what are you doing?" Fourth Aunt opened her eyes wide and hysterically scolded, "That's not something you can take. Don't be presumptuous." At the bottom of the table, the young man shrugged helplessly. "Look at what you're saying. Everyone's surname is Lynn. Why can't I be the one in charge?" The little hut in the forest leaned back in the chair calmly and grinned. In his hand, wrapped in brocade, was an ancient short stick with ferocious scales carved on it. A dragon head. Chapter 875. 9 hours later, a metal train full of goods stopped outside Kyoto in the station that belonged to Dambwa Industries. After the carriage was pulled open, the stench of feces gushed out from it. Bright flashlights shone in, illuminating the haggard faces with disheveled hair and dirty faces. They gathered together. Some were male, some were female, some were old, and some were young. Their faces were bloodless, some were pale, some were sallow, and none of them were healthy. Some people shrank back uneasily, some took the lead nervously, and some young girls bit their lips, tried to wipe their faces clean, puffed out their chests, and quietly pulled down their necklines, trying hard to show their value. There were also people whose eyes were filled with hatred and anger, gritting their teeth. Most of them had no strength left. They just lay on the ground, numbly panting in a daze. Without exception, they were all mixed race. In the silence, Lin Sherjo looked at those gazes, wanting to say something but hesitating. But soon he retracted his gaze and turned to leave. When he got out of the car, he said to the person there, "Please count the number of people, Wenokun. Wash them clean and check them. Be quick and finish before the next batch comes." The burly man with sharp teeth nodded and didn't say much nonsense. He raised his hand and put on the hood of his raincoat. He waved his hand behind him, and a dozen people immediately rushed in with short sticks and began to unload the goods violently and efficiently. The whistles were sharp. From time to time, there were rough urges and angry curses. The mixed-race people on the truck were chased down one by one. Regardless of whether they cooperated or resisted, someone immediately stripped them of their clothes. Regardless of gender, age, or age, they directly tied plastic wristbands with printed codes on their wrists, locked them, and stuffed a small piece of soap into them. Then, outside the door, someone holding a faucet turned on the spout, and the cold water violently washed everyone's body. There were sharp exclamations, impatient urges, and rough roars and urges. After washing up, the people were pushed into a temporary disinfection corridor. After passing through the suffocating white fog, they were stuffed with a set of dried uniforms. Immediately, they were sent to the temporary settlement by the carts. No one explained, and no one came out to comfort them. There was no time to waste. There were more people waiting behind. I'm afraid that the people who came to this place wouldn't believe the lies of the rescuer either. Most of the mixed breeds would only think that they were being sold again as cheap tools, disposable consumables, and sent to a crueler place. When they couldn't resist, they could only numbly pray that the darkness waiting for them in front of them wouldn't be too dark. But he did not dare to imagine that there would be light. The cars from Kyushu have already arrived. The smoking homeless man scratched his head and took out a can of beer from his coat pocket. He raised his head and gulped it down. Wiping his mouth, he joked, "So fast. Don't people from Ingzhou like to dawdle? Why are they so fast this time?" Dragonhead's words are indeed effective. The cabin in the woods glanced at him and ignored him. That's the third batch tonight. There was more to come. Sharp curses came from afar. "You will die a horrible death. You will all die a horrible death." In the stinking car, the old man holding the dying child screamed and struggled, but he couldn't resist the rough pull of the extreme Tao and was dragged out. After the child was taken away by the medical guards, he was also stuffed into the washing line. He wailed and cried, but his cries were drowned out by the sound of running water. It was unclear. "Look, they don't believe you." Lawrence tilted his head and lit a cigarette. "Besides, they might not be grateful to you for all you've done. Could it be that my teacher did all this so that they could line up and walk up to him one by one to thank him?" The cabin in the woods was amused and shook his head indifferently. "Come on, he doesn't care. Sounds so noble and pure. It makes me, Green Sun, ashamed." Lawrence shrugged. "Since you know you're Green Sun, don't show up in public so high profile, okay?" The cabin in the woods indifferently moved a step to the side, then raised his collar, revealing the symbol of Inspector Danbois. "Mr. Lawrence, what are you doing here? Can I take a look?" Lawrence looked at him innocently. "I used to have a discerning eye. I could tell at a glance that your teacher was not an ordinary person. We still have a relationship. Don't be so cold. Besides, the mixed hero white paper man is a member of our Green Sun. You can't just wipe your mouth and leave after freeloading, right? Once people started to be shameless, they would be invincible in the world, especially an organization like Green Sun, which could always surprise people in unexpected places. For example, the great hero white paper man who had recently risen to fame in the border area, a good example of Green Sun, the light of the righteous path appointed by the great commander. Undercover in the Astronomy Association, defeating the looming Hall, assassinating Minister Yushing, saving Danbois, and leaving, and so on. There were countless rumors. For a time, it attracted the hot blood of many men and the love of many girls. After being freeloaded by the Astronomy Association, Green Sun began to freeload the Astronomy Association. You said that Huaishur was a spy. I said that White Paper Man was our spy. He was a chess piece that the great commander painstakingly buried in order to save innocent mixed-race compatriots. You didn't expect it, did you? If you don't believe it, you can ask Huaishur. This brand-new publicity strategy from the inside out revealed a smell that Huaishur was familiar with. It really made him speechless and unable to refute it. He wanted to refute your mother king bullshit, but Danbois and Green Sun really did have that kind of illicit relationship in private. For the sake of a long-term friendship, it was even more difficult to separate them too much. He could only pinch his nose and acquiesce. Over time, even the people of Green Sun started to believe that their family had recently gained a big shot who was insufferably awe-inspiring in Danbois. He was truly powerful beyond compare. So let's talk about it. The cabin in the woods rubbed his eyebrows. I'll say it in advance. I'm just a tool and don't have the ability to make decisions. I know. Lawrence nodded knowingly. It's all the teacher's task, right? If there's a problem, you'll blame it on others. You and your teacher have really learned from each other. Don't worry, it's not trouble. I'm here to do a good deed and help Danbois solve its problems. Lin Shurjia looked back at him, full of doubts. Even Green Sun is starting to do good deeds. What's wrong with this world? Even the leader of the six, he society wants to abandon the dark and join the light, let alone green sun, right? Lawrence no longer entangled on this point and said straightforwardly, "Indeed, I need to congratulate you first. Dombois has completed the crucial second step. After the next hybrid statistics and birthplace are completed, it will become the holy temple in the hearts of all the beast men. But the key is these people." He raised his finger and drew a circle around the stinking train in front of him. "What are you going to do with these people? Dombois is free to arrange them." Lin Shurjo replied coldly, "You should ask Yuan about the relevant planning. I understand. Dombois needs manpower. All kinds of things have to be done. It lacks manpower and manpower. As long as the hybrids want to live a stable life, they want to be able to find a home there. It's really a good thing." Lawrence smoked and suddenly asked, "But what about those who don't want to live a stable life? What are you going to do?" The cabin in the woods did not answer him, and Lawrence had already stepped forward. He stood in front of the stinking carriage and looked inside. He did not dislike the filth in it. Instead, he took a deep breath of the stench and exhaled a dim smoke. He sighed softly. "Look, Mr. Lin, the feces, the blood, the phlegm, the stench, the enclosed space, the endless fear and waiting. This is what they have experienced along the way," he said sympathetically. "How pitiful." The cabin in the woods replied coldly, "We have done what we can." "I know. I understand. I understand." Lawrence turned his head and smiled, but it was exceptionally mocking. "You know, even in such an environment, for many people, this was already heaven compared to the mines, devil's dens, and poison kills they used to live in. It's like a villa by the sea. It's spring and flowers bloom. It's unimaginably beautiful." As if recalling the past, the tramp's eyes lit up with a strange fire. "For many people who are even more unfortunate, this world is like hell. You can't save them, Mr. Lin. Your teacher, the ivory tower behind your teacher, even the former Utopia and the Astronomy Society are the same." He said firmly, "They have long been destroyed by misfortune, pain, and despair. They have been destroyed by everything they have experienced. Family, love, hope. After everything they relied on for a living was taken away, they were injected with malice and grew up in a dark place like hell. A stable life and a beautiful future can't heal them. Their hearts have long been filled with hatred and anger. Your Dombois is not their heaven, nor is it the place they want. They are your burden." Lawrence told him, "As long as they have the chance, they will take revenge. As long as they are still alive, they will become hidden dangers and poisonous seedlings. No matter how many times you try to save them, they won't be used again." The cabin in the forest lowered his head indifferently and lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth. "Dombois has its own management system. You don't have to worry about it. The system can't solve all problems." Lawrence said, "There are more suitable places for them in this world." He glanced into the distance. In the deep night, there was nothing. He was referring to a more distant and ethereal place, the bottom of the sealed border, Canaan, the place where the abandoned gathered together to keep warm. "I want to take them away," Lawrence said. The cabin in the forest did not say anything. He just smoked. He raised his head, silently, and stared at the sky above his head. But there were no stars in the sky, only dark clouds. He suddenly thought, if the teacher was here, how would he answer? But then he suddenly did not want to continue thinking, because he already knew the answer. That guy would definitely shake his head indifferently, right? A cold rejection, a mocking retort, and mercilessly cut off Lawrence's thoughts, silently putting all the burden on himself. Regardless of what kind of disaster a moment of kindness would bury in the future, he would never allow anyone with a future to walk into hell and go to that kind of place. Fortunately, He was different from the teacher. The cabin in the forest shook his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. No matter how brilliant the teacher was, it was inevitable that there would be scum students, right? The world was like this. It was really sad. He lowered his head and stopped looking at the sky. He finished smoking in silence. After stepping on the cigarette and putting it out, he let out a long breath and talked to himself. Doomsday is not a prison, the cabin in the forest said. This is a place where you can come and go freely. After saying that, he no longer paid any attention to Lawrence. He turned and left. Outside the station, in the back of the car, the girl, who was a little bored from the long wait, was playing games with her head down when she heard the sound of the door opening. Back so soon? She looked up curiously. I thought you would be busy until late. I'm a little tired. I want to rest. Do you want to go back? I can drive. No need. The tired man rubbed his face and lowered his head. Just a little sleep for a while. Then sleep, Mountain Coon. The girl reached out, rubbed his hair, and told him, it doesn't matter how long you sleep. I will be with you. She smiled, and her eyes were as bright as stars. A gentle hug. The cabin in the forest closed his eyes. Chapter 876. I don't know what the people from Green Sun just said, but Lin Kuan couldn't lift his spirits. Thank you for your hard work. Please have a good rest. Leave the rest to me. Although it's not good to say this, can you kill the bad guy? Please be magnanimous. I'll take care of it. Then I'll leave it to you, Yuan-chan. 10 minutes later, Yuan put down her phone and rubbed her swollen forehead. She couldn't help but sigh. The old assistant from the ivory tower brought over a cup of tea and smiled. What's the problem now? It's rare to see you so worried. Lawrence went to find little 19. For the new beast men, what else could it be? Yuan shook her head. I'm afraid it's also Green Sun's instruction. They want to take advantage of the gap when teacher is not here. In a short period of time, Doomsday needs the power of Green Sun to spread his influence among the beast men between the borders. There's no way to divide them. As a new force, no matter how bright the future was, it was still in a state of development and preparation. Doomsday's attitude couldn't be blindly tough. Sometimes, as long as it didn't touch the bottom line and principles, a temporary compromise was necessary. Most of the time, compared to the decisiveness of doing everything in one fell swoop, the tenacity of dripping water is more precious and difficult. The old assistant, Freeman, pushed his glasses and sighed softly. Over the past few days, as an assistant from the ivory tower and the main management member of the campus, he had witnessed the rapid changes here with his own eyes. Even after leaving Huaishur, his students still faithfully carried out the plans and goals he left behind without any deviation or wavering. Outstanding talent aside, this firm determination was even more admirable. Mr. Lin is too harsh on himself. The old assistant smiled and comforted her. I believe that to be able to do this, Mr. Huaishur will also be gratified by your growth. Maybe, but he won't necessarily be happy. Yuan shook her head and sighed. To be honest, even as someone who was trusted, Yuan often felt the extent of her teacher's excessive ambition in the complicated work that she had to deal with. How could he just throw such an important task to someone else? Two students who hadn't even graduated yet. This was not a relaxing assistant who could help him grade homework or attend classical music classes, but a major power that could affect Doomsday's future. Even if he had the support of the ivory tower, he was still too confident. He didn't have to worry about the 6 society infiltrating the alliance, nor did he have to worry about the Gen family controlling his lifeline. They were even more indulgent than they were. Because of this, Yuan would be more cautious when making decisions on behalf of him. Lin Shurjo was even more cautious. Every day, he would say, "It's just my teacher's task." How he wished he could become a fully automatic tool. It was as if a newbie player had suddenly been thrown aside by a top-notch big shot account that he could play and learn as he pleased. The pressure was immense. However, progress and growth were equally gratifying. But even so, they still had their limits. In the face of this world, even a behemoth like the Astronomy Association was still powerless, let alone a mere Danbo. There were some things that even Huaishur couldn't solve. Just like those beast traits, who were filled with hatred, they had already fallen into their own hell. There was no cure. Even if they stayed, they would only become a hidden danger. Don't feel sorry. Freeman looked at the numbers on the report and sighed helplessly. This is an inevitable choice. I believe Mr. Huaishur can understand. Teacher will definitely understand, and will be very angry. Yuan raised her eyes and said calmly, "It's not because Forest Hut gave up on those people, but because he took this responsibility for himself." She was completely sure of this. Even if he knew all this, Huaishur would never have any criticism or dissatisfaction with Forest Hut, but he would also not agree with his choice. Because even if he had to make a sacrifice, it was not something that Forest Hut should decide, and it should not be a stain on his hands. He should not follow the same path as the Lin family. Ever since the day she had accepted him as her student, Huaishur had never had such a thought. Even if it was natural for the Lin family to take the blame, and even the Lin family themselves felt so. Even if the Astronomy Society wanted to pursue Danbo after the event, Huaishur would definitely forge his own signature to prove that all of this was his instruction. Isn't the so-called teacher and student like this? The old assistant chuckled softly. In comparison, children are an extension of the bloodline, and students are the ideal future. He hopes that you can be better than himself. He is the future of others, and in the future, you will also be his future. This is the meaning of inheritance. It's really heavy. Yuan rubbed her eyebrows and sighed in distress. Don't worry, there is a heavier reality waiting for you. Freeman put down his pen and knocked on the table. The report on the table flew up as if it was alive, danced, and landed on Yuan's table. It neatly turned into a stack. He said, "You also have to make a decision, madam." Now, when Huaishur left, the affairs of the Danbo campus were jointly decided by the two students appointed by Huaishur as agents. This was not because the Ivory Tower's assistance was insufficient, but out of respect for the campus. They would not overstep their authority. Only when the two could not agree would it be uploaded to the School Affairs Office according to the procedure. If the School Affairs Office could not make a decision, then Vice Principal Isaac would discuss it with Russell. For example, now, the preliminary population census of the Danbo district had come out with results, and part of it covered the beast men who were constantly gathering in Danbo from the present and the border. In that case, the biggest problem they had to face was how to settle them down. With the size of Danbo, no matter how many came, it would be able to digest them. After obtaining civil rights, anyone with a skill would be able to get a foothold in Danbo. Even if they did not know anything, they would be able to earn a living if they worked hard. Not to mention the training that the Ivory Tower's abundant educational resources could provide. In this situation, the most troublesome were not the homeless who had nowhere to settle down, nor were the homeless people with hatred. Instead, it was the old, weak, sick, and disabled, due to the torment of illness. The average lifespan of the beastmen was generally no more than 50 years old. Those who were over 40 years old were already considered old. Moreover, long-term malnutrition and the erosion of the abyss sediment, as well as the restrictions of the living environment and the lack of medical conditions, caused most people to age prematurely. What's more serious is that the beastmen who were recently transported here, Freeman adjusted his glasses and hesitated to speak. Most of them were used as cheap labor and slaves. They worked in mines and workshops that did not see the light of day for many years. Some were even used to cultivate and experiment with forbidden drugs, not to mention the tragic experiences of selling sex and organs. Many of them even doubted how they were still alive when their bodies were examined. How to settle these people was now the top priority. Should they be saved? Should they be treated? How much subsidies would they have to pay? After treatment, they might not be able to recover. After recovery, they might not be able to work. Even if they worked, they would definitely bid farewell to physical activity. But did Donbo really have so many jobs? From the coldest and most utilitarian point of view, those people full of hatred were not a burden to Donbo. These sick and weak people were, and the damage caused would only be greater than those people if it was not properly dealt with. Donbo, who had just started out, would undoubtedly be covered with a layer of shadow. It would also be an unbearable burden for the finances. No matter what, let's hurry up and treat them. After all, time is precious. Yuan sighed in distress. Don't we have an agreement with the medical institution of the continuation hospital, providing the biological data and information of the beastmen, plus the experimental and cost reduction of the new drug? It might not cost much. What's the next arrangement? Freeman asked, will Donbo be responsible for their future lives? There's one good thing about modern society. It's not easy to eat, and it's easy to eat until you're full. It's just a few more mouths. If they can't engage in physical activity, doing some light and simple social work, even pasting paper boxes is better than doing nothing. Yuan thought for a moment and said seriously, let's do our best. This is not something that can be solved with a moment of determination and effort. Freeman reminded. For Donbo's finances, this is a long-term pressure and may even last longer. There will be more problems in the future. Do we need to discuss it with Mr. Lin? He won't object. Yuan laughed. Otherwise, the teacher won't be angry when he comes back. He'll beat them up. She was also incomparably sure of this. From the perspective of management, this is something that doesn't have any cost-performance ratio. Donbo is not responsible for them. Miss Yuan. Freeman said, we don't owe them anything, and we've even done our best. Even if we give up, no one can blame us. They're just unlucky. They didn't come at the right time. But if you want to do something, how can you just look at the pros and cons? There are always things to do, Mr. Freeman, whether good or bad. This was not the same as doing business. It had nothing to do with the so-called luck. This is not their luck, she said. This is Donbo's responsibility. So, Yuan calmly picked up the pen, signed her name at the end, and stamped Donbo's seal. Then, she reached for the next document. The work continued. Some burdens could be cut off, but some burdens must be left behind. True or false, good or bad, lies or hope. Time would tell. This vast destiny was the proof of the existence of the future. At the same time, on top of Helios, Huaisha raised his eyes. A lonely and pure silhouette leapt out from the heart of the eternal frost furnace in front of him. Stepping on the steel ground that had turned green, the white deer nimbly strolled through the irises. Its tall antlers spread out like a tree crown, growing countless flowers. Its clear eyes quietly observed everything in front of it. Origin substance equipment, compassion incarnation, Chapter 877. Unexpectedly, after passing the most difficult period of development at the beginning, the subsequent battles were smooth sailing. It was simply a crushing defeat. Such a lackluster development was completely out of Weischer's expectations. He had been prepared to write 100,000 words in the Book of Destinies, but he did not expect to skip the early stages with a quick refresh. Still, that was normal. He had Grandmaster Mikhail as his backer, the Eternal Frost Furnace as his support, and the remains of Grandmaster Pubris as his mediator. Not to mention, he had a wide network of connections, and most importantly, the omnipotent Tongji's support. Even the referee is on my side, okay? Unless he had to arm wrestle against a bugged player like the Grandmaster, how could the other players with no paywalls fight him? Just like now, in the instant that the doors to the Eternal Frost Furnace opened, the face of the opposing alchemist quickly turned unsightly. At first, he had intended to grit his teeth and struggle for a bit after comparing the height difference between the two towers, and there might be a chance of victory if he used the field's mechanics well. But when the incarnation of wrath stepped out of the darkness with two fiery glints in its eyes, his majestic hellish horde began to tremble. When the white deer of compassion silently appeared from behind, the summoned creature at the front was already on the verge of losing its balance. In the literal sense of the word, it was as if spring had arrived on the battlefield that was suddenly filled with lush grasses and flying orioles, chirping birds, and fragrant flowers. All things were growing wildly. Innumerable bewitching poisonous flowers and vile grasses were spreading ever-changing poisonous strains, and where the green light passed, all things withered. On the other hand, the Paradise Guardians who were brandishing their great swords and axes appeared to have been drugged. Their bodies swelled and were full of energy, their mouths shouting chaotic battle cries, as their eyes glinted with green light over their ferocious faces. After 3 iterations of the casting technology, this group of guards had become out-and-out Iron King Kong. Even the smallest of them was more than 3 meters tall. Instead, not a single they were riding on a steam locomotive driven by all of them were relic cumbersome internal combustion engine through forging. The steam trains were pitch black in color, dusk and had the collector's beauty edition of a classical style. The sharp horns, other than the increase in numbers, were dyed scarlet heralds by the color of elite blood. Swordsmen. There were no tracks, and other more detailed mobility was not inferior to that of a tank. There was even a new branch. Its speed was astonishing. The most eye-catching thing was that the cavalry under the prince's command that looked very much like a friendly puppy, for some reason, in front of him. After combining the technology of the Twilight Village, it became a little strange that something was wrong. That was because these guys were not riding on horses. Becoming stronger was the right thing to do. As for the rest, there was no need to care too much about it. And when 6 steam locomotives barged into the battlefield with a high-pitched whistle, the heavy cannons were raised and slowly aimed at the formation in front. The alchemists on the opposite side finally could not take it any more under the continuous refresh of their worldview. They were completely subdued by Weischer's unique style. They took off their glasses with trembling little hands. I admit defeat. On the Sunmaker's throne, Weischer shrugged and praised. You fought well. Following his words, the giant deer that was the embodiment of compassion appeared behind his opponent. It glanced at him coldly before disappearing without a sound. So, in the collapsed tower, only a skeleton that instantly decayed was left. It dissipated in the wind. Soon, with the roar of the fog, a new piece of land was pieced together into Weischer's territory. This time, the restrictions of the land were quite strange. It was as if the land near the furnace had its own high-temperature environment, and the concentration of abyssal sediment in the dilapidated temple was astonishing. Because of the interference brought about by Publius's mysterious instrument of creation, Helios was now completely hellish, and the land formed more or less had some negative effects. The reason for its formation was often related to the distortion of the land itself. At the same time, it would also have a huge impact on the outcome of the battle. Before this, the only time Huaishur had been defeated in the showdown before the gods was when he fought with others for the broadcasting center of Helios. It could be said that he had fallen into a ditch and could not climb out, because the restriction of that piece of land was that singing was prohibited. It even prohibited all rhythmic sounds that could be called melodic. For others, the restriction was completely insignificant, but for a disaster musician like Huaishur, it was simply the most desperate disaster. The performance method that had long been integrated into his instincts brought about the crisis of sudden death in an instant. Every heartbeat and every breath was a countdown to death. The technique that had made him famous in the past had become the reason for his defeat, and Huaishur could not spit out a mouthful of old blood in his throat. This was F*King beyond the ordinary level of absurdity, and now he finally saw an even more ridiculous restriction. Drinking was prohibited here. What's going on? Huaishur scratched his head. It's one thing to catch people in a strange dream, to pay their respects, but not to sing or drink. Is this the rhythm of forcing people to observe mourning? Normal operation, Tangi's mocking voice sounded. The essence of Publius's mysterious instrument of creation is to try to trace back to the old days of Helios, reverse the death of the gods, and create the birth of gods. If the death of the emperor was only to prevent people from singing and drinking, the mortals would probably wake up laughing in their dreams, right? Helios itself was once the territory of the gods, and after combining with the vision of the death of the gods, such restrictions could not be more normal. If you ask me, you've hit the jackpot this time. Hurry up and check if there's anything else that can be used. Something that can be used? Huaishur raised his head and looked around. Countless giant cylindrical cauldrons stood in great numbers, and the air was filled with a pungent, sour, and rotten smell. Many of the cauldrons had cracked, and all kinds of strange liquids leaked out from within. The messy corpses on the ground had long been corroded into bones. He walked among them, distinguishing the functions of the instruments and the solutions: storage, sedimentation, filtration, and sifting. This was one of the pre-processing centers for alchemy materials in Helios. Its function was to perform the preliminary processing, decomposition, and storage of most liquid materials. Even after the chaos, most of the instruments were still operating. But compared to what was truly important, these were only insignificant things. At this moment, in the center of the processing center, the deep pool that looked like a lake was still being stirred endlessly by the huge swinging arm, and all kinds of essence from the abyss were being extracted from it. Under layers of sifting, the surging streams were gathered in the giant cauldrons in all directions through a network that extended in all directions. When the huge instrument was operating and several streams converged, all kinds of complicated potions could be formed without the need for refining in a furnace. This was simply an alchemy production line that was like a cornucopia. The incomparably precious silver blood potion in the present realm was almost gathered into a river here, and there was no end to it. The blood of the ancients from a higher level was piled up like a mountain here. And finally, after layers of processing, mixing, and extraction, the ripples of the countless streams would collide, and wisps of silver-white mist would rise up and gather in the large urn in the center. Huaishur walked to the side and looked down. The silver spring water in the large urn was as smooth as a mirror reflecting his sluggish face. He subconsciously reached out, but just as he was about to touch the water, he retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted. He took a long ladle embedded with jewels and diamonds from the shelf next to him, carefully scooping up a little and bringing it to his face. He carefully confirmed it again and again. He took a deep breath. In an instant, his spirit was lifted. When he poured 2 drops into his hand, he felt a warm current spread through his body and into his soul. A wonderful fragrance lingered at the tip of his nose, intoxicating him and causing his cheeks to turn red. Supply of origin substance. This large urn was actually filled with liquid origin substance that was not inferior to the exclusive supply of the Astronomy Society. Just a few drops from the small ladle had completely replenished Huaisher's origin substance that was lacking because of the forging. He even had a surplus, causing him to enter a strange state of excitement. He was so energetic that he wanted to immediately take off his clothes and run 2 laps in the snow with the sleigh. He subconsciously pulled at his collar, panting, and noticed the abnormality in his body. Even with his resistance, there were signs of solidification, although it was very subtle. It was still very eye-catching under the illumination of Great Si Ming's divine mark. Even with Huaisher's poison resistance, there would be abnormalities. If it was a normal person, with just 1 drop, they would have been immediately deformed, right? What is this? He picked up the ladle again in disbelief. What else can it be that can nourish the soul, but also cause people to fall into depravity? Of course, it's the divine wine. Tongji whistled and sighed happily. This is a huge profit. Huaisher. This is the sanctuary of Dionysus. It was once a place on Helios where the god of wine was worshipped as the last territory of the Olympian gods. All the places on Helios corresponded to the gods. After combining with Publius' mystic instrument, this place was almost equivalent to the temple of the god of wine. All the creations naturally received the blessings of Dionysus. The muse's divinity in the broadcast center was not even worthy of carrying his shoes. After all, he was one of the 12 Olympian gods who was once as famous as Apollo. Although the authority of the god of wine Dionysus was not as awe-inspiring as his brothers and sisters, it was still indispensable. Moreover, he was the kind of person who hid his strength and did not bark when he bit people. The Greeks regarded him as the master of revelry and joy because he was the guide of all the souls of the living. With just a thought, he could send people to heaven or hell. He could free people from pain. And he could also intoxicate people with the pleasure of depravity until they were sinful and irredeemable. Just a portion of the god of wine here reflected the dual attributes of sublimation and solidification. Needless to say, this was only the raw material. After further processing, all kinds of wonderful uses could be discovered. It was simply omnipotent. It was a pity that it had now become a solidification curse. It just looked very beautiful. Perhaps before the abnormality in Helios was resolved, it could only be poured into the internal combustion engine of the Dusk Knight's train and be used as a powerful fuel. Just as Huaisher was feeling regretful, beside him there was a slurping sound. When he turned around in shock, he saw that half of a skeleton had already crawled into the pool without him noticing. Wow, there's so much wine. A certain simple-minded person who did not know what he was drinking looked up with sparkling eyes. Yay! Chapter 878. In the long silence, Huaisher and the skeleton who was soaking happily in the poisonous pool looked at each other. Neither of them seemed to understand why the other was acting so strangely. They looked at each other without saying a word. Huaisher finally coughed dryly and broke the silence. He asked tentatively, "Sai, why didn't you say anything before going down?" "Huh." The skeleton was stunned for a moment, as if it finally understood something. It was in disbelief. "You're so stingy, go." It widened its dark eye sockets and complained with hurt. "I've already treated you to so much wine. Why can't you even bear to drink so little?" Huaisher couldn't hold back a mouthful of blood. He only felt a pain in his head. Are we talking about the same F*** king thing? He felt terrible all over. Aren't you afraid of being poisoned? Poisoned? How is it poisoned? It's such a good wine. The skeleton looked at the pool it was soaking in puzzlement. It didn't understand what Weisher meant. It even lowered its head and drank 2 big mouthfuls. Isn't the taste quite authentic? In the silence, Weisher didn't speak. He looked at it with his mouth agape. Love, looking at the wine. Half an hour later, from the gap of its jaw, beside the wine pool, as if it had undergone some magical quenching. The godly wine gradually boiled, like formaldehyde meeting bamboo that intoxicated people. The essence of hell in the gradually tumbling water. Wine slowly the skeleton's 2 arms rested on the edge of the pot. It adhered to its skeleton, towel causing the originally pure after getting into a comfortable position. With faint it let out a carefree moan, which became more and more prominent and lively. Okay. The corner of Weisher's 2 more pieces of firewood. He felt after the godly wine in the wine pool fresher from a corpse that had been dead for a long time. It was completely purified. Wow, ago. Then, through a slender conduit, the skeleton raised its hand, it dripped into Weisher's water tank and shouted excitedly, "In this way, a freshly there was no time to correct was the term at this moment. Weisher in the iron pot, seen the scene of skeleton enjoyed the long sprouting from the skeleton's. It held the small cup in its hand rapidly and drank a big in mouthful. The end. They became so slender and that little stars as almost appeared in its eyes, as golden silk. Ago, you are so good to terrifying. In front of the iron pot, rubbed his eyes hard to make sure that wiped his sweat. He wasn't hallucinating, and smiled. The skeleton in front of him. Don't mention it. Indeed, we don't have to be so after polite. Soaking in the poisonous he casually wine. Pulled 2 books was so from the pile of ancient books beside that it was enough to move it down. He tore up the valuable ancient books to tears, and manuscripts. The only flaw was that it seemed to only grow in the middle and not into the fire. To maintain he had turned into a Mohican with there was the style no pity. Of a punk. Anyway, what kind of miraculous principle could cause such a change? Weisher had some expectations for Helios. He felt but after that going through some of the alchemist's of this world had begun to soar again. He found that they would no longer keep up with the changes. It was simply unsightly, especially after it could be said that although it would be unfair to kill all of them, greatly there would be fish that was almost the net if they were killed one by one. His gaze just look at these guys' notes became and hamsters to know was this if it was not private research not only could it be sacrificed and as biological alchemy. It could also be used data records of various soul experiments. There were also all kinds of methods and precautions for trading with various existences in hell. What's more, there were all kinds of inhumane secret instruments and methods to obtain materials. Those guys had already crossed the boundary of ethics in the vast space and stepped into the category of taboos. They even dared to touch the field of the elements of destruction. In just a few decades, under the guidance of the Pied Piper, the alchemists who monopolized the remnants of the gods had fallen to a jaw-dropping level. At first, they might have just skipped some steps for convenience and used a more radical method. Later, they began to get used to repeatedly testing the edge of the boundary until someone was willing to pay any price for the results. When the bottom line was gone, everyone would fight to be the first to fall. In order to circumvent the restrictions of the 3 major seals, the increasingly crazy alchemists even tried to simulate the environment of old Gaia in the enclosed space of Helios to be closer to the ecology of the Chaos era. It was not a harmless phenomenon like the coral clouds, but an invasive species that would cause endless trouble. It was a poisonous environment that was absolutely incompatible with the current situation. Even if they did not succeed, they still left behind all kinds of scalp-numbing records. The ancient Grand Master Solomon had predicted the 72 sequences of hell, and they had revised 21 of them. They even made up for the creation of the 4 pillars of Asmodeus, how to use the solidification of souls to form 18 different manifestations of the essence of hell. The lords of the 18 hells swallowed and fused with each other, assisted with the secret instruments and stigmata, smelted and transformed, and finally created the authority of Asmodeus and then became the ruler of hell. Even if it was just a deduction and speculation, it made Huaishi's scalp tingle. The thirst for hell had driven this group of people into madness. Even if they knew that there was a taboo ahead, they still jumped into the abyss with confidence and hope. In the process, there were many alchemists who were used as sacrifices, and there were even some who cut themselves. It was better to burn this kind of thing that would only become a poison if it was kept once and for all. In the midst of the burning, Huaishi paused and glanced at the end of the paper in his hand. Unlike the madness and distortion of the content, the handwriting left by the writer was full of certainty. It could be said that the strokes were iron-like, and the power was penetrating the back of the paper. Full of hope, he left a prayer for the future at the end. I am offering a meager sacrifice today in order to reap the fruit of redemption in the future. May the truth have mercy. Seeking salvation, and hope in hell, seeking the truth. It was like a cold joke. But this was the essence of alchemy. If he attributed the hell he saw to the erosion of the Pied Piper, he would be underestimating Helios too much. Even if there were no believers of the Pied Piper, it was only a matter of time before Helios lost control. The existence of the Pied Piper, the element of destruction, was nothing more than a catalyst. It caused the existence of an organization to fall into collective fanaticism and extremes, distorted beautiful dreams and ideals into hell and despair, and caused all the huge future to collapse due to its own weight. Those who pursued justice became lunatics who couldn't tolerate any evil in their eyes. Those who longed for the truth burned themselves by playing with fire, and those who expected salvation fell into hell. That was what he was best at. It was as if he had just casually pressed the switch that represented the impulse to self-destruct, and everything began to rapidly change beyond recognition until it fell apart, and its original appearance could no longer be seen. Truth. The skeleton in the iron pot soaked in wine looked at the paper in Huaishi's hand as if it was drunk and couldn't help but sneer. What's the use of truth? It can't be eaten. Huaishi was slightly stunned. He casually threw the broken page and his hand into the fire and looked at the skeleton of Pubris. I thought you would feel the same way. No, my uncle used to think about this stuff all day long. Didn't something happen to him in the end? That's why people with good brains like to think too much. The skeleton, who had been cooked to 90% well, burped happily in the divine wine and concluded it's still better to eat and drink. That was great. Huaishi was speechless. You're the skeleton of a great grandmaster. Why didn't you inherit even the slightest bit of the great grandmaster's nature? You only think about eating and drinking, but what he said did make sense. Eating and drinking was indeed good. Who didn't like to live a life of good food every day? Huaishi couldn't help but feel the same way and express his agreement. But the skeleton began to moan and groan. But it's not good to eat and drink too much. You'll run outside and mess around. Ah, I remember now. It suddenly slapped its forehead and cried out. Huaishi subconsciously raised his spirits and saw the skeleton look over. It had a head of magical Mohican blonde hair and said to him in a very serious tone, My father might not be a good person. In the long silence, Huaishi's expression twitched, and he nodded with difficulty. Yes, I can see that. The skeleton waved its hand and emphasized seriously, No, what I mean is, he seems to be messing around outside behind my mother's back. And then she gave birth to a little zombie. Huaishi looked up at the sky and sighed expressionlessly. Brother, why can't you remember anything useful? Even if you remember a little bit of what you used to do, it would be better than this. He really didn't know what to say. He could only comfort the skeleton with a helpless expression. Look on the bright side. It's not just your family. Maybe all the species in the world are the same. But that's not right. The skeleton became more and more confused. It scratched its blonde hair. I don't seem to have a father. No, who is my father? He can't be a scum, right? That can't be. We, the Hermans, have always been loyal to our marriage. Huaisher rolled his eyes and planned to take this thing out of the divine wine and dry it first. You don't even have a stomach. How can you drink so much? But the words that jumped out of the skeleton's mouth, in the end, stunned him. It was unbelievable. Wait, what did you say? The skeleton looked at him blankly. After thinking for a while, it repeated, marriage, the sentence before that. Huaisher widened his eyes and asked word by word, what family did you say you were from? The Hermans? Didn't you just say Herman? Huaisher was so anxious that he wanted to hit the skeleton. I can't remember clearly. The skeleton fell into a state of stupor again. Speaking of which, is my name Puberus or Pavlov? Huaisher rolled his eyes. He was very anxious. He took out the Book of Destiny and repeatedly confirmed that he hadn't heard wrong. The skeleton had indeed said the Hermans. The Hermans? The famous pure-blooded family, the inheritors of the holy name of the Blessed One, a core member of the Roman genealogy. This wasn't the first time Huaisher had heard of it, but Puberus shouldn't be a member of the Hermans. On the contrary, coincidentally, he just happened to know a direct descendant of the Hermans. Even more coincidentally, the other party was above Helios. Isn't this just a coincidence? The senior leader of the Stone Cauldron Society, a legendary alchemist of the Roman genealogy, and a giant who had stood at the peak of alchemy 100 years ago. At the same time, he was the old bastard who had tricked Huaisher into marrying Helios, the great grandmaster Garland Herman. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but move closer to the skeleton and pick up its skull with both hands. He raised it and looked at it carefully. Big brother, who are you? The innocence in the skeleton's eyes was about to overflow. I don't know either, brother. I'm just a corpse, okay? And I'm only half a body. Don't ask me such a question that's out of my scope, okay? It picked up the wine cup in its hand, scooped a large cup of wine from the pot, and stuffed it into Huaisher's hand. Come, drink it and you'll be done. It was as if it didn't care whether the friend in front of it was Huaisher or a dog. As for whether it was Puberus or Garland, it couldn't be bothered to care. What was the use of thinking so much? It was better to eat and drink. Chapter 879. Within the gloomy hall, countless translucent faces floated in the alchemy array on the ceiling. The dead souls were reconstructed using origin substances and records, creating a nearly perfect replica of the spirit body. At this moment, countless voices continuously rang out in Hades's ears. Your progress is already too slow. When is this going to end? We need to make changes. Otherwise, we'll suffocate to death. I said a long time ago that we should use Rome's secret methods. The outdated Greek methods won't work. There's no point in going back on our words now. It'll only increase the internal strife. Our talents aren't as good as Puberus, but Puberus doesn't have any energy left. Blood, spirit, body, and bones. After so many splits, does he really still have his original talents? I'll be honest with you. I think creating a god is pretty stupid. You should try my project. Huh? The artificial silver, see, can't be controlled at all. It's actually more practical than recreating a remnant evil. If you want to talk about this, I'm not sleepy anymore. Enough. A dignified spirit interrupted the useless bickering and grumbling. The origin substances that flowed between the spirit-body replicas rapidly transmitted the conclusions of their thoughts. The sparks of their thoughts collided and rubbed against each other, finally coming to a conclusion that everyone agreed with. The dignified face of the previous chief descended, looking down at Hades's cold face. Losing the initiative is equivalent to sitting and waiting for death. Hades, you are the chief. You should do something. There was no resentment that came from being poisoned and murdered. There was no brainwashing or modification. They didn't care about any abuse or torture. They didn't even care about their own that had been resurrected. Moreover, after death, it was just that he couldn't all about providing their murder. It wasn't like he couldn't continue his research. They didn't even still pursue new intelligence. They were already dead. Wasn't that even good? If they knew I don't that like Hades was rashly before I get to know my opponent's background. It didn't matter. Hades shook his head. Of an alchemist had long since the faster you die. At the end of the day, didn't the desire to research because of your own uncontrollable urge to haven't explore? You learned your lesson? Those important parts that made up the spirit on the armrest faithfully reproduced. After muttering to himself those mediocre people who died in pure deaths, that fanatical martial artist from the Astronomy Society has never been anything to fear. Deaths. After leaving behind a bit of regret, they began he's too far away. Continue to provide only services to the murderer. He can't do anything back. They just wanted to see the result. The real threat, even if the self-awareness was fake, they still wanted to satisfy this irredeemable impulse. Looked up, and reality had in today's era, that is there anyone else who can activate the showdown of the gods? Since the existence of the great grandmaster was not something that it's Mikhail, flawed, a 40% chance that it's an unknown divine then why not accept their own 19% and follow the changes to explore a higher among realm? Them, the chance that a real god will descend here is less than 1%. The previous first seat quickly came to the most objective conclusion. The gods repel each other. Hades, it's like two stars that won't easily get close to each other. After Apollo's mystic instrument of creation was activated, it's impossible for another god to enter Helios. Or rather, it's because Publius's creation of divinity was too successful that it was used by his opponent. The representative of the souls gave a final warning. It's the most dangerous time. We have to respond. I know. Hades tapped his assistant and said calmly, I know. At that moment, in the holy temple of Hades, the king of the underworld, under the gaze of countless souls, the huge array in the center of the hall lit up once again. After offering a huge number of sacrifices and countless offerings, liquid gold rose from the cauldron, breaking through the blood and turning into a descending embryo. An endless amount of darkness seeped out from within. Then, a tall and thin figure appeared from within. It was dark all over, covered in layers of gold ornaments adorned with lapis lazuli and rubies. Its vertical eyes slowly looked up. It sniffed the air and frowned in displeasure. The stench of an alchemist, the one who wore the crown from hell, looked up at Hades and mocked. Are you the contractor? Do you expect to bind me with such a thing? He opened his mouth slightly and blew gently. In an instant, the wind of decay from time broke through the layers of boundaries and turned into a torrent, rushing forward. Soon, it disappeared in front of the scepter in Hades's hand. The witness of the contract is the supreme one who blows the voice of truth. Hades asked expressionlessly, How dare you offend his majesty? There is no second master. Watch your words, jester. A cold light appeared in the beastly vertical eyes of the one who wore the crown. I only serve the Lord of Decay, the immortal King of Wither. This is also the permission of the King of Wither. Hades raised the scepter again and pointed it at his face. Demon of Sumer's hell, the solidified evil spirit, Gala the traitor, I command you in your name, obey me. He paused for a moment and revealed a malicious smile. Or you can make another choice. Under the restriction of the contract, the ancient solidified, one fell silent. Countless phantoms appeared in the strange luster flowing on the gold ornaments. All of them were the twisted faces of the dead. After a long time, he slowly looked behind him. In the darkness behind him, a pale face appeared. Shrouded in a pitch-black veil, it was a beautiful face, but it was completely lifeless. Gala had no mood to appreciate this stunning beauty. Instead, he was full of disgust for the pair of empty eyes. It was a lie, a false bubble, just like the promises of all the jesters. There was no truth to it, but at the same time, it was full of threat and malice. I will abide by the contract, alchemist. Gala withdrew his gaze and chose to obey the authority of the Supreme One. Give me weapons, give me blood, give me war. Finally, keep your doll away from me. Then, happy working with you. Hades raised his hand and once again made an inviolable contract. As the darkness dissipated, countless huge shadows emerged from the end of the hall, like a tide. They looked up with their scarlet eyes. They could not wait any longer. I've prepared the war you want, Gala. Hades smiled and told the leader of the large group, who was loyal to death. Before the war is over, learn to get along with Pandora. At the same time, in another huge hall, the visitor put down his teacup and picked up his cigar again. I have a feeling that you are in big trouble, Garland. This has nothing to do with you, Ezector. In front of him, the Grand Master, shrouded in an invisible flame, said coldly, you just need to do what you want to do. You don't need to care about other things. Ah, now even little Garland looks down on me. Izzy scratched his head awkwardly and was full of concern. Am I not here to care about the health of the younger generation? Blood fever is such a troublesome disease. Can the body still withstand it? More than enough. Garland lowered his eyes and stared at the hot blood flowing from his fingertips. Droplets of blood dripped onto the ground, burning patches of scorch marks. Then, I will not disturb you. Izzy raised her hand and put on her hat. She got up and patted her pants. She politely said goodbye. Since you invited me to tea, how about I give you a prophecy? Not interested. Garland replied coldly. No matter what happens, everything is part of fate, isn't it? You are so similar
Garland
to
retracted
Publius.
his gaze.
Izzy laughed.
Ezector,
Who
the
says
demigod
not? From America, the high priest who inherited noble blood and holy will, had disappeared without a trace. In the silence, the dazed Rachel next to him opened his eyes as if he had just woken up from a dream. What happened? He asked, puzzled. What? Nothing happened. Garland stared at the fog in the distance. He looked at the tower burning with the light of the sun. It was as if he could see the embryo of God brewing in it. The embryonic form of God was also looking at him. Thus, his eyes gradually turned cold. It made his blood run cold. For hours later, Huaisher, who was drinking, playing cards, and singing, suddenly stopped. He was pulled to the top of the eternal frost furnace by an invisible force. He held the cup in his hand in a daze and sat on the throne of the Sunmaker. Only then did he realize that he had been so high on eating and drinking that he did not see that the countdown had ended. Before he could react, a new round of battle began. When the roar burst out from the fog again, a ferocious outline appeared in front of Huaisher. surrounded by colorful RGB lights. A tower rose from the ground like a dragon. The broken dog that had disappeared for a long time appeared in front of him. Huh. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. He did not expect that he would be the one fighting himself this time. Then he saw countless intersecting roads extending out from the fog, covering the entire battlefield. Hundreds of magnificent bronze mirrors that towered into the clouds stood in the middle, slowly rotating and reflecting the complicated and changing reflections. The complicated and strange paths were like messy wool that twisted together, turning into a dead knot that could not be untied. Just looking at it made one dizzy. The three forks overlapped and became a strange maze. No one could find the beginning and end of it, and this time the rules of the venue were so strange that no one could understand them at all. Reversal of gains and losses. What kind of rule was this? Was it to restrict alchemy? Huaishur looked up blankly and looked at the opposite side. Then he saw himself sitting on the throne of the Sunmaker. Huaishur revealed an evil and wild smile. Saliva and tongue were thrown out from the corner of his mouth. It flowed all over the ground. Chapter 880. Looking at his silly appearance. Huaishur suddenly felt like he was looking into a mirror. But when he lowered his head and saw his sharp claws, and when he looked back at his blade-like scales and tail, he scratched his nose, creating a large amount of blazing sparks. Huaishur finally came to a realization. Oh my God, I've become a dog again. What the hell? What's going on? What's going on? Huaishur did not feel good at all. It was fine that he had inexplicably become a dog, but the problem was that the dog had become him. Now, in front of Huaishur's eyes on the tower, he was squatting on the Sunmaker's throne. He raised his legs and swept his ears. After a satisfied yawn, he stuck out his tongue and licked the skull of the skeleton. Enough. Brother, enough. Don't King lick me anymore. Huaishur looked at his image rapidly collapsing. He remembered that tears were about to come out of the dog's head. He felt sad. Tangi, save me. Tangi was stunned for a long time. She looked at him and the dog with schadenfreude and could not help but roll around in laughter. Silly boy, I can't help you even if I want to. What's going on? Isn't this the rule of the land? Tangi wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. Reversal of gains and losses. So, this is what it is. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. I see. Don't keep me in suspense. Huaishur barked. Immediately, Huaishur on the opposite side barked as well. It seemed to be scolding someone. Well, to put it simply, you seem to have won the lottery again. Ha ha ha. Tangi could not stop laughing. 3 forks in the road, maze, night, secret, and door. I think I know what's going on. Huaishur, this is the temple of the goddess of witchcraft. Hecate. Hecate, a hidden existence in Greek mythology, was a goddess rarely known to anyone other than the 12 main gods. In reality, his background was shockingly great. There were many scholars and alchemists who suspected that this goddess was just a puppet of another god system. Tracing back and analyzing, it could be found that this goddess once had the authority of the sky, the earth, and the sea. She even vaguely had a huge influence in hell. Sigh, now that I think about it, she was really a difficult woman to deal with. Although she was an autistic person with social phobia, it was troublesome to communicate with her. No matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. She was simply the ultimate paranoia. Later, when I found out that she died, I sympathized with her for a long time. Tangi seemed to have accidentally dropped another important piece of news, but Huaishur, who had turned into a dog, didn't want to listen to it anymore. So, what does this have to do with me turning into a dog? Although it's a long story, let's keep it short. Tangi thought for a moment, then happily explained, "Do you know why the gods are working together?" What do you mean? Simply put, why do we need to form a divine system? Why sure, have you ever thought about this? Tangi said, imagine if you were a god born with power and not eating the food of mortals. Although there is a limit to your lifespan, it is still so long that you can't see the end of it in a short period of time. If you have time to eat and drink, why do you have nothing better to do and work with others? Nothing better to do? Weisher scratched his head. His paws rubbed against the dog's head, making a sharp sound. But soon he realized the answer. Destiny? Yes. Imagine that you, Weisher, are a kindergarten Annie who has to take care of children every day, but you are also a kindergarten security guard and have no time to do anything else. At this time, someone comes to you and tells you that he can help you protect the kindergarten, but you have to take my child with you. What would you think? You mean it's a win-win situation? Bingo! Tangi snapped her fingers with her little wings. If there is such a thing as a social history between the gods, then this is probably the embryonic form of a divine system. Everyone has their own strengths and needs. In order to fulfill their destiny and satisfy their own desires, they choose to work together. A chef, a kindergarten teacher, a security guard, and a handyman ant work together. They form a kindergarten and compete with other kindergartens for business. Tangi smiled meaningfully. The competition between the gods is also quite fierce. There was a period of time when everyone was seriously involved in the internal affairs. This is a digression. In short, the existence of a divine system is based on the union between the gods. Take Olympus, for example. Everyone has their own division of labor, and at the same time, the internal struggle is fierce. From the first generation to the second generation to the third generation, until the third generation completely established a stable structure. After killing his father, Zeus and Poseidon reached an agreement with his unlucky brother Hades. Zeus, as the lord of the sky, had supreme authority. Poseidon ate the biggest piece of meat and ruled the ocean, while the unlucky Hades could only work with Nyx to suppress the revival of chaos. After he went to hell, he became a black glove that did the dirty work for the gods. In short, Zeus became the CEO of Olympus, Poseidon was in charge of finance, Hades was in charge of risk control and internal elimination, Hera, the head of the audit department, Hephaestus, the head of the equipment department, and warehouse manager, Hermes, the head of the information department, and the three Fates were in charge of human resources. The head of the R&D department was Hestia, Zeus's sister, in name. The real controller was Lady Hecate, the goddess of concealment. Tangi finally revealed the puzzle. In Olympus, Hecate and Hestia controlled the witchcraft and magic of the old era. It is one of the origins of alchemy. After hearing this, Weisher fell into a long daze. After a long, long time, he could not help but become angry. But what does this have to do with me turning into a dog? I'm almost there. Can't you wait a moment? Tangi calmly flapped her little wings. The authority that Hecate has is sacrifice and dedication. If we use the term alchemy to describe it, then it is one of the basic rules of modern alchemy. You win some, you lose some. What she is good at is reducing losses and increasing results, or achieving results that could not be achieved by multiplying losses. This is the meaning of the reversal of gains and losses. Why sure? Tangi said with a faint smile. Sometimes what matters is not what you gain, but what you lose. Weisher was dumbfounded. He lowered his head and looked at the dog's head in the mirror. What did I lose? Humanity. But then his expression stiffened. He looked at himself, who had a silly look on his face, and faintly came to a realization. You mean that stupid dog is the price I paid for losing it? From the perspective of alchemy, this is true. Why sure? Tangi chuckled. Don't tell me that the current you isn't the result of many sacrifices. Everyone who wants to grow must experience setbacks and pain, and must give up some things. This is what the so-called adults are like. From the perspective of alchemy, don't you think that after going through the tempering of the furnace of fate and abandoning the naivety of the past, you forged your current self? In your origin equipment, Bichimos represents pain. It combines with the beastly side of your nature and represents your qualifications after solidifying. It can be said that it is the embodiment of your beastly nature. Although your beastly nature is the same as your true self, it is always silly and cute. Ha 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 ha. If other alchemists were here, they would at most find that the price they had to pay for their alchemy would multiply, and their alchemy would become uncontrollable. But the one who was matched with this arena is you. No, it should be said that it is precisely because of you that you were matched with this arena, right? In the secret ritual of today's showdown before the gods, all karma will be magnified thousands of times. You might have been favored by Hecate's divinity. Everything is a link of fate, isn't it? This was the reversal of gains and losses, the results of alchemy, and the price paid had been switched. Huaishur, who was the result, and Bichimos, who was the price, had been inconceivably swapped. Huaishur seemed to have vaguely grasped something in his heart, but when he thought about it, he couldn't figure it out. But he couldn't help but inwardly breathe a sigh of relief. At best, this was just a restriction brought about by the arena. Once the showdown was over, it would naturally be swapped back. But the problem now was, how was he going to fight? Huaishur raised his head and happened to meet the eyes of Huaishur. Just like the malevolence and cruelty in Bichimo's eyes, Huaishur, who was sitting on the throne of Sunmaker, had a chilling glint in his eyes that made people shudder. A strong fighting spirit rose from between the two towers. It stirred the clouds. At that moment, the war had begun. 20 minutes later, on the battlefield, the park guards roared and bellowed at the lizard giant that was close at hand. The lizard giant waved its hand and panted heavily. Behind it, the army of 10,000 roared with all its might. Holy! Snatch the landlord! Holy! Don't snatch! Holy! Double! Holy! Super double! Only the dumbfounded skeleton, sitting in the middle, looked at the cards in his hand and scratched his Mohican blonde hair. His face had long been covered with tinfoil strips. This game is so complicated. How do I play it? Just like that, the 5th round of the Helios Landlord tournament began again. At the side, Wrath, who was so bored that he was lying on the ground, glanced at Compassion beside him and threw a glance as if asking, "Are you stupid?" Compassion gnawed on the poisonous grass under his feet, thought for a moment, and nodded. To be honest, he was indeed stupid. I feel like someone is scolding me. On the Dragon Tower, Huaishur raised his paw and scratched his dog head, puzzled. But then his movements stopped in place as he felt a violent tremor engulfing the whole of Helios. The earth roared. A terrifying loud noise accompanied by a blazing light rose from the distant fog into the sky. After tearing everything apart, it surged into the sky. The countless blood-colored lights, like burning flames, converged and turned into a wriggling abstract hand, reaching toward the darkness of the universe. Little by little, it once again challenged the sun, hanging high in the sky. In an instant, a vision shrouded the whole of Helios. The upheaval came suddenly. Huaishur looked up, stunned, and his tongue stuck out. "Oh my God, Tangi, come out and see God." Tangi didn't say anything. It was just that her expression gradually became subtle. What was this? Should I say as expected of a grandmaster? Chapter 881. Half an hour ago, on the other side of Helios, an ethereal tower made of intertwined light and a blood-colored bone tower were facing each other from a distance. It was just like a battle between gods and demons. The sloppy man leaned back in his chair and drank wine. As one of the splits of Pubris, he represented the existence of the Grand Master's soul. Opposite him was Hades, who looked calm. They were not at daggers drawn. There was no killing intent between them. That was fast. Hades. Looks like those third-rate alchemists aren't useless after all. The drinking alchemist commented on his former colleagues. He looked down on them, but there was no mockery or arrogance in his words. He was just telling the truth calmly. Even the translucent souls beside Hades did not object. Those who played with words were destined to miss the true essence of alchemy. Alchemists who had reached this level knew where their limits were. For the Grand Master, they were no different from trash. There was no reason for him to be angry, just because he told the truth. They were already dead. With their abilities and wisdom, this was the limit they could reach. With the support of Hades' temple, they managed to interfere with the operation of the showdown of the gods with great difficulty, barely bringing forward the duel between Hades and Pubris by 10 rounds. And this was with Pubris' cooperation. Be patient, Pubris. Hades said, if you want to succeed, you need some time. As he spoke, the door under the tower opened with a bang. Amid the gushing blood, a figure covered in luxurious golden ornaments slowly walked out. There were 2 curved scythes at his waist, and his scarlet eyes glanced at his opponent. On the other side of the battlefield, there was a silent, burly giant, Hercules. The sound of metal clashing suddenly burst out. Sparks jumped out from the void, and the high-pitched screeching sound of metal instantly spread out. Gala had unsheathed a scythe at some point, but Hercules still did not move. He just silently looked at his opponent, who was provoking him. Silently, a gap appeared on the scythe, and Gala's eyes turned gloomy. He put away his weapon. He just spat unhappily, a second-rate product made by God, really useless. He didn't know if he was talking about his weapon or his opponent. Even though he had received Hades' warning in advance, he still ignored the taboo and provoked the enemy. In the end, he returned empty-handed, which made the death follower who was intoxicated in slaughter and blood extremely unhappy. He couldn't fight to his heart's content. It was not satisfying at all. Alchemists, hands silence, he slowly moved aside, revealing the darkness behind him. In that darkness, under the protection of countless monsters, a girl with a black veil stood silently waiting. Jia Luo crooked his finger, indicating for the puppet to come forward. Then he grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. He pushed her to the center of the arena. Hurry up, Gala urged impatiently. Hercules raised his head and looked up. After getting a signal from Pubris, he got up from the ground, slowly took off his weapon and shield, and threw them on the ground. Only a black box was left behind. Step by step, he walked forward. The strange aura hidden in the box was so strong. Even if it only existed, it caused the surrounding scene to distort. The darkness wriggled and coiled around the box, turning into a layer of fog that drifted with the wind. Illusory laughter and crying came from the dark fog. It was filled with the aura of all disasters and chaos in the world. The corner of Gala's eyes twitched, as if she recognized what it was. She unhappily took a step back, then another step back. She pinched her nose, unable to bear the stench left behind by the gods. Just like that, Hercules stepped forward and put the small box into Pandora's hand. In an instant, all the strange phenomena disappeared. It was as if everything just now was an illusion and had never existed. But the girl holding the box clearly became more lively, as if she had a trace of life. She was just an android created by alchemists, an empty shell with the mark of God. But at this moment, when the eyes under the black veil moved, They glowed with an incredible spirit. It was so tempting. Open it, Pandora. Hades lowered his eyes, and a fanatical light appeared in his eyes. I offer this unique sacrifice to the gods who are paying attention to this place. He said, "This is your fate." At that moment, under the command and control of alchemy, the two completely different marks of God, created by Grand Master Publius and Chief Hades of Helios, merged into one. The humanoid relic named Pandora and the box named Disaster merged into one, forming a terrifying tide that reversed the general trend and subverted all the rules. Under the veil, there was suddenly an ear-piercing shriek. It was like a child who had died prematurely and a woman who was about to give birth. It contained pain and despair as if it was real, and it ravaged every inch of the eardrum. It made Hercules step back, unable to resist the strong soul poison in the voice. It was a poison called hope. At this moment, 2 lines of blood and tears snaked down from Pandora's eyes, and in her hands, the dark box cracked inch by inch. The taboo sealed in the darkness gushed out. It was not disaster, nor was it terror, but a pure golden light. It was so bright and so glorious, as if it was the epitome of all the beauty in the world, and it made people yearn for it. Just looking at it made people want to rush forward regardless of their own safety, and it was difficult to restrain their greed. They wanted to get it. They wanted to get it. It was an apple that looked like it was carved out of gold. At this moment, along with Pandora's movements, terrifying flames rose from her body, incinerating every inch of her body and flesh. However, she seemed to be unable to feel any pain. Behind the burning black veil, there was the first smile since she was born. It was so happy, but also so vicious. Vengeance against the high and mighty paragons. She finally spoke, and her soft voice echoed above Helios, resounding in every inch of space, and echoed in every temple, replaying the prelude that had once caused the turmoil of the gods. With this humble offering to the most beautiful goddess, at that moment Pandora was completely burned out. Instead, the terrifying light emitted by the golden apple soared into the sky, tearing apart all the mystic instruments and shrouding the entire Helios. What was triggered was a riot that completely overturned the showdown of the gods. The love and hatred between the gods were replayed once again. Countless high walls of fog dissipated, and the bells in all the temples rang again. The symbols of the gods, who were originally harmonious on Olympus, suddenly became alienated and cold at this moment. The balance was broken under the curse of the gods. Hera, Hestia, Demeter, Athena, Aphrodite, Artemis, Persephone, Hecate, even the 3 Graces, the 9 Muses, and all the goddesses of Olympus were instinctively rioting under the temptation of the golden apple. They attacked each other, repelled each other, racked their brains, just to monopolize the meaningless bright light. This was a disaster that existed in history and was even predestined, the fuse that triggered a huge war that swept across the entire Mediterranean world. After 100 years, it was replayed in the vast space. After a long period of planning and brewing, the Grand Master Publius finally launched a counterattack against the invaders. In an instant, the showdown of the gods collapsed without any attack. Then, let us challenge the gods again. In the Tower of Light, the prototype of God, who was operating in the fierce light, looked up and whispered, "Just like 100 years ago. Just like 200 years ago." After experiencing countless failures and setbacks, after enduring a long period of imprisonment and torture, after suffering endless humiliation and disgrace, he once again launched an attack towards an unattainable realm. This was the destiny and dream passed down by countless alchemists for hundreds of years. One day, I will master the truth and surpass the gods. At this moment, along with his words, the blood-red hand tore apart the mystic instruments of the showdown of the gods and stretched out its palm toward the sun in the sky. and all the showdown stopped. The participants looked at each other blankly, not knowing what had happened. They only saw the blood-red meandering in the field and converging toward the giant tower of light. Among them was Huaishur, who had unknowingly returned to his human form. "Oh my God, Tangi, come out and see the gods." But Tangi did not go to see them. Unknowingly, she had disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had fallen into another sudden dream. She did not resist. Instead, she obeyed the call of that will, passing through the ancient times and arriving at the dazzling palace. When she raised her eyes again, she was already sitting in the center of the long table. She was like an uninvited guest who had suddenly appeared at a joyous banquet, causing the original laughter and happiness to disappear without a trace. "Oh my, how have you been, everyone?" Tangi looked up and looked at the blurry figures around her. Finally, she looked at the clearest old man at the head of the table and smiled. "How have you all been?" At this moment, the burly old man with white hair and beard held a wine cup, raised his head nonchalantly, and drank it in one gulp. "They are all obsolete goods, who have been dead for God knows how many years. What's good or bad about them?" The remnant that was once known as Zeus calmly put down the wine glass. "Instead, it's more complicated to see the enemy of the past dancing in front of our graves. Really, they are all dead. Why can't you be more generous?" Tangi waved her hand indifferently and looked around. "Aren't you going to give me a cup? You are so cold. This is the banquet of Olympus. Outsiders are not welcome." "It's okay. I brought my own." Tangi turned her hand, and a teacup with a pink pig's head printed on it appeared. She shook it proudly. "My contractor bought it for me. Are you jealous?" In an instant, the blurry figures around her looked at her strangely. It was as if they had seen a ghost. "Contractor? You? Are you serious?" Chapter 882. The atmosphere suddenly turned weird. It was as if they saw a heinous serial killer coming home to cook dinner for a kitten. They even hugged the kitten and meowed with it. Even if they were remnants of the past, the only remaining reflections of the gods, those blurry silhouettes could not help but reveal astonishment and bewilderment. It was like seeing a ghost. Tangi did not care about those gazes. She opened a can of happy water, poured it into the glass, and put in a straw. After taking 2 sips of the tea in a relaxed manner, he asked, "Then back to the topic." She said, "You have all been dead for so many years. Do you still want to be my stumbling block?" At this point, she showed a kind smile. As a beautiful and kind big sister who loves peace the most, I really do not want to touch the ashes of my acquaintances. But if you insist on not giving me face, I have no other choice but to burn you." The joyful atmosphere disappeared without a trace and was replaced by hostility. The gods' murderous intent intertwined with each other, making the sweet wine bitter. There were no bubbles in the happy water, and it turned into a greasy syrup. At the top of the banquet, a low voice sounded. "The current you? Forget it." Zeus poured away the wine and said, "What else can you get from the fight between the phantoms other than destruction? We did not intend to stop you." "But you stopped me, didn't you? You changed the rules of the showdown of the gods." Tangi reminded them with a blank expression. "You chose to stand against me, just like in the past. Even after so many years, you dead things can still dream here, and it's all thanks to me. In the end, you choose to bite the hand that feeds you and make others feel bad. Are you even human? It is not the first time that Olympus has repaid kindness with ingratitude. Is this rare? Besides, we are gods. Isn't it a bit too harsh to ask us to be human? If I remember correctly, our relationship was never friendly. No, it should be said that we hated each other as much as the sea. Zeus didn't try to hide his actions at all. He just calmly told her, since this place is in front of the gods, then the duel should be fair. We're just fulfilling our responsibilities. Instead, you're standing on the side of your favored one, aren't you? Tangi's expression suddenly turned serious as she raised a finger. Correction, it's contractor, not favored. What's the difference? Zeus was puzzled. Of course there is. Don't think that everyone is like you, okay? You Olympians change, wives like shut-ins changing paper dolls. You want to mess around with a beautiful heifer. Whenever you meet a good-looking boy, you want to take care of him. Our Dongsha is very serious. Speaking of this, the corner of her mouth curled up into a sneer. Besides, don't think that I don't know that you Olympians are a bunch of trashy entertainers. In the end, you just want to see Troy again, right? You're already dead. Why do you still like to mess around? Zeus shrugged indifferently. He didn't feel guilty at all. Instead, he asked in a self-righteous manner, "Don't you want to?" He paused for a moment, and his smile became more and more strange. Or, as a goddess, don't you care who gets the golden apple? Would you be interested in a boring result that has long been destined? Tangi raised her finger and pulled a strand of brocade-like black hair behind her shoulder. She calmly asked, "Isn't it natural for a good woman like me to get the golden apple?" After that, she paused for a moment and looked around. There shouldn't be any playboy who likes to mess around with me, right? No way, right? No way, right? Sister Raven is under a lot of pressure. Can you let Sister Raven take it first? As soon as she said that, half of the vague silhouettes cast hostile and hateful gazes in her direction. They couldn't restrain themselves. Those distant voices were full of anger, but it was difficult for them to travel through time to reach this place. The dream was too thin to bear anymore. Moreover, there was not much divinity left in them. They couldn't even show their original faces. Only their instincts remained. They were no different from the clay statues in the temple. Only Zeus, the king of the gods, as the symbol of Olympus, could temporarily break free from the state of annihilation and arrive here in a clear state. It was easy to imagine how complicated his feelings were when he saw his former opponent jumping around and dancing on his family's grave. As for Tangi, after drinking the wine from the small cup, she had already picked up the fruit plate on the table and started eating. She was smacking her lips happily. She was also sighing. This is the taste, authentic. Ah, that's right. A family should be neat and tidy. She threw grapes into her mouth and looked at the only empty seat at the banquet. Why is Apollo not here when so many people are here? Didn't he die a long time ago? Zeus drank his wine and said calmly, "Killed by your own hands." Sigh, it's all in the past. When we were young, we didn't know anything. It's normal to make mistakes. I was still a child at that time. Look, I've already let it go. Why can't you guys let it go? She was brazenly provoking the former gods. She was not worried that they would attack her out of anger. Tangi tilted her head, spat out the grape seed in her mouth, and said casually, "Speaking of which, you guys should be thanking me." The corner of her mouth curled up, and she no longer concealed her mockery. "I'm the great benefactor who saved him from the same fate as you guys." The cold winter wind, the cold moonlight as sharp as an arrow, the roar of the god of war, and the hostility of the judge. At that moment, under this humiliation, the projection of the Olympian gods appeared blazing scarlet. Zeus's eyes flickered with a flash of fury. "Do you want to start a war?" The former king of gods asked coldly, "You came to Helios without our permission. Now we have hosted you and invited you to the banquet, and you have only brought mockery and humiliation. Our remaining bones have not decayed to the point of no return. If you want to start a war, you can just say it. No, Isn't this your own humiliation? Tangi held her cup coldly. You destroyed everything you created with your own hands. Because of your greed, you have fallen to this extent. Don't you allow me, the one who cleaned up the mess, to complain? Why do you think you can still keep your temples? Why are you still here? Zeus, if it weren't for the fact that Helios is still useful, do you think I would waste my time talking to you? Tangi raised her eyes and calmly told all the gods here, you have only yourself to blame for what happened to you. From the moment you wanted to abandon this world to get rid of your destiny, you were destined to end up like this. The White Crown King has seen the risks of this. He warned you, but no one listened. He could only go far away and cut ties with you. In the end, he was still implicated by you and lost his integrity in his later years. She said, that's what they call self-reaping. Not only the Olympian gods here, but also from Rome to Egypt, from America to Doomsday. In her opinion, the gods who had fallen without exception had only themselves to blame. This was the consequence of placing hope in hell. Was there a mistake in seeking a future in the abyss? This was what Tangi did not tell Huaishur. The latter half of the so-called social history of the gods, the inducement of the fall of the gods hundreds of years ago. The divinity born from the pillar of God's marrow betrayed the destiny, and the gods who ascended from the present realm betrayed their duties. They were unwilling to live a mere 1,000 years, unwilling to be restrained by destiny. The insatiable greed in human nature became the source of motivation for countless explorations, through bloodline, through favor, through grace, through command and punishment. They wanted to break free from the shackles. Therefore, there were many demigods, and the power of miracles was passed down to the mortals. Therefore, the existence of the genealogy was formed, contending with each other, killing each other, and changing. Rome, Doomsday, Egypt, India, America, the war spread, engulfing every inch of the present realm. The floods and disasters caused by the war brought the whole world to the brink of destruction several times. Even if the wise tried to save the world, it was still in vain. All the efforts they put in were just a drop in the bucket. Until half of the gods fell because of this, the remaining survivors learned from the painful experience and tried to find a second way out of the dispute, since the war could not achieve the goal. Therefore, the only path left was to join forces. The first to make a change was the Pantheon. The three Thunder Fathers of Rome, Greece, and Northern Europe were the first to form an alliance. Since the existence of the gods was to share the destiny, why not unite more? Similarly, in order to obtain more correction points, why not be more straightforward and enrich the destiny on the same existence? Whether it was thunder, the sun, the moon, wine, art, punishment, guarding, war, benevolence, fertility, cursing, hunting, planting, all of them were gathered into one. It was as if the mortals had pooled their funds to invest in a company. Several enterprises had joined together to form a genuine monopoly group. Long before the term syndicate was born in economics, its physical form had already appeared in the hands of the gods. All authority was gathered together as the means of production. Divine grace and divine power were given to non-existent legal persons. In this way, an idol that did not exist in the world was created, a so-called omniscient and omnipotent public account, and its owners, the angels. The Holy Spirit genealogy was born because of this. It was an unprecedented gamble, and then he obtained an unprecedented success. More and more gods joined in, abandoning war and choosing a win-win situation. There were even people who followed suit and started a new business. After the first person ate the crab, all kinds of new ideas emerged one after another. The gods hidden behind the scenes were like shareholders in the board of directors. They received a steady stream of correction points dividends and obtained the crucial freedom. It was simply a golden age that was as beautiful as heaven. The whole world was developing rapidly, and the entire realm was growing rapidly. Just like the non-existent Eden, there was milk and honey in the river, figs on the trees, and the water was as sweet as wine. Even if someone saw the hidden dangers, no one cared. Even if the actual executor, the selected CEO, the deputy of heaven, issued a warning to the shareholders, the gods who were obsessed with profits still did not care. Even if this intoxicating beauty was rooted in hell, even if the era of flowers in front of them was overdrawing the life of the realm, the law of the conservation of miracles was thrown to the back of their minds. No one cared about how tragic the hell such a huge miracle would create in the abyss, and how huge a reflection would the omniscient and omnipotent empty shell form, and what kind of seeds of disaster would be planted. Just like before the subprime mortgage crisis, every investor would ignore those groundless rumors. The risk was controllable. Everyone said so, but no one cared about the unknown risks. Until one day, the disaster came without warning. After a long gestation, the evil consequences finally sprouted from hell. Overnight, an unprecedented storm spread rapidly and spread over the heads of every participant. Even the innocent who did not participate were not spared. Only a few lucky ones were able to survive because they slept, faked their deaths, and protected, or replaced, and saved at the last moment. The end recorded in the book of Revelation came. The end called apocalypse, solidification, fall, dusk, and the 5 decays of heaven and man. It was no different from death. Under the terrifying gravitational force from the abyss, decay and collapse spread rapidly, returning the will of heaven to the realm, leaving authority in the mortal world, and throwing miracles into the human world. After losing everything, the dead gods fell from heaven, passed through the realm, and fell into the abyss. It formed a spectacular and desperate situation called the Fountain of Light. In the deepest part of hell, the last remaining divinity ushered in the final distortion and solidification, conforming to the gravitational force of the abyss and converging into one. So, the reflection corresponding to the omniscient and omnipotent existence, the only true God left in this world, the supreme ruler, was finally born from the deepest hell. With the loud sound of the realm collapsing as the first cry, the element of destruction, known as the rancher, opened its eyes. It looked at the world that belonged to itself. For the first time in its life, it felt the so-called hunger. Until today, the thing that was most qualified to call itself a god in the world was still continuing its unsightly state and continued to devour. The disasters and poisons caused by it were all proof of this sin. Don't you regret it? Tangi looked at the gloomy faces and asked curiously, "Don't you feel ashamed of it?" In the silence, Zeus suddenly laughed softly and mockingly. The old god-king raised his head and drank the cup of cursed wine in one gulp and asked nonchalantly, "Is there any difference between you and us? Or do you need me to remind you, Tai? Even if you knew in advance that your success would only last for a moment, and that everything you did would lead to betrayal and alienation, would you stop what you did? If the alliance is the sin we committed, then wasn't the war before the alliance caused by you? Isn't that so?" Tangi replied calmly. Lowering her head and looking at the pink porcelain cup in her hand, she laughed self-deprecatingly. "Perhaps this is the price I have to pay." In the silence, no one said anything. In the face of ignorance, the gods themselves kept silent. Chapter 883. At this very moment, above the disc-shaped Helios, the color of blood was surging and converging towards the axis of the entire world, climbing up along the great tower of light of Pubris. Just like the Tower of Babel that had once defied the gods and ascended, the obsession that had been passed down for thousands of years reappeared at this moment. The fruit that countless alchemists had dreamed of was right before their eyes, towards the sky, towards the sun that was high up in the sky. Publius, no, all the alchemists above Helios, the souls that had sunk into hell, the dead that had done nothing, and the wills that were filled with unwillingness and pain, all of them extended their palms towards it. Even after a long period of time, this achievement had gradually lost its meaning. But the mountain was there, following the path left behind by the gods. The alchemists once again began to climb. Boom! On the Tower of Light, the alchemist who had been drinking stiffened for a moment. He sighed and raised his head to drink the last drop of sweetness. "What a pity," he murmured softly, closed his eyes, and silently turned into ashes. His strength had been exhausted, but the next Puberus raised his eyes again and threw himself into the torrent without a care for his own safety, until this excessively scorching flame burned him to ashes. Then the next one, and the next one, countless split souls, harboring the same obsession, threw themselves into the furnace, using their own ashes to lay the foundation of the tower, causing the giant blood-colored hand to move upwards, upwards, and upwards, until the end, ignoring the burning of the sun, it firmly grasped the incorporeal proof of the gods. Inch by inch, it was pulled downwards. It was as if it was so hungry and thirsty that it wanted to swallow the gods into its stomach. "Great spirit of the gods, I will offer all my sacrifices for you." Puberus was burning. Amidst the flames, he continued to split himself and toss them into the furnace. He grinned and laughed maniacally. "Please mourn for me." At that moment, in the venue of the Do Diju tournament under the eternal frost furnace, the skeleton holding the cards paused for a moment. It seemed to be puzzled. Something doesn't seem right. It slowly lifted its skull that was plastered with paper slips and looked at the bloody light that pierced the heavens and the earth. Finally, it felt the attraction and calling from the center. Involuntarily, he was pulled away from the ground and floated up into the sky. "Oh my God!" it exclaimed. "I'm about to ascend." Huaishur reacted and quickly stretched out his hand. The rope of sorrow extended and wrapped around his skeleton, holding it in place. Bichimos opened its mouth and bit on its head, trying to keep it in place. But the attraction of the same origin was too great, and there was no way to stop it. Soon, cracks appeared on its arm. Then, the great rotor fell off from its body and flew into the sky. Following that, all the bones in his body shattered under the restraints, turning into fragments and dust, flying rapidly towards the giant Tower of Light. By the time Huaishur reacted, the skeleton had already completely fallen apart and disappeared without a trace. All that remained was a thin strand of origin substance. It was like an illusion. All that was left was a half-transparent skull that emitted a faint glow of origin substance. It was as if the skeleton had suddenly turned into a ghost. It had lost consciousness and entered a state of stupor. What the hell? Huaishur scratched his head, unable to understand. Just as he was trying his best to maintain the skeleton's last bit of origin substance, he heard a warning from behind him. "What you're doing is useless," the old voice said. "Pubrilius has retrieved all of its fragments, so it has lost its foundation. Don't you have the divine wine? If you soak it in, it should be able to remain intact. If you keep doing this, I'm afraid it really will fall apart." With this warning, Huaishur's movements were extremely quick. He took out his own water tank and carefully placed the skull inside. As he watched it swim around in the purified divine wine like a goldfish, Huaishur couldn't help but feel a surge of sorrow. Good. This time it was really going to be soaked in wine. As the quintessence of origin substance, the divine wine had the ability to maintain any shattered soul. However, no matter how he looked at it, it looked as if it had been soaked in formalin. It won't die just like that, right? Huaishur muttered worriedly. The divine wine will maintain its existence. As long as you can retrieve what Publius took away, your friend will be able to return to its original state. The person who didn't belong here had already come to this conclusion. When Huaishur turned around, he saw an old man leaning on a cane. An uninvited guest, Garland. He couldn't help but frown. Grandmaster, why have you come? He asked. Could it be that you're here to punish me, the arrogant person who has violated the contract? Beside Huaishur, Bichimos raised its claws and licked the sharp edges of its claws. Sparks flew everywhere. Its gaze suddenly became dangerous. Behind Garland, Rachel's face paled. He couldn't help but take a step back. There's no need to scare people. Huaishur, Garland said coldly. Although you've successfully bought us quite a bit of time, the showdown before the gods has already gone out of control. Once Publius truly pulls that solar wheel into his array, he will become the new sun god, the true ruler of Helios. If we want to stop him, we have to join forces. Regardless of whether it's rational or beneficial, this is the only choice for you and me. Oh, Huaishur was amused. Back then, you sold me out so thoroughly. Now, you're turning around to talk about cooperation. Isn't the thickness of your skin a little too exaggerated? Grandmaster, I admit that the destruction of the boundary marker was intentional on my part. However, isn't that part of our deal? Garland remained calm, without the slightest hint of guilt. There's no point in returning the son of Leviathan. Rachel is proof of that. After being infiltrated by Publius, Leviathan is even more dangerous than Helios. Everyone who isn't on the contract has nowhere to run. Instead, I'm the one who saved you. What about the key? Huaishur sneered. Letting me use your name to go to Helios is also considered saving me, isn't it? Didn't you ask for it yourself? Garland asked in return. I've even confirmed with you your purpose over and over again. You want to obtain the reflex crystal. However, without my authority, you won't be able to enter the core of Helios at all. I've already warned you of the risks. From the very beginning, it was clearly stated in the contract that both parties must not deliberately harm each other. Now, this clause is still in effect. Huaishur. In his hand was the scroll of the ancient contract. The clause at the top was still glowing, proving that it was true and effective. You can say that I took advantage of a loophole or deceived you. After all, from the very beginning, we never trusted each other at all, right? Garland said. But now, if we want to stop the situation from worsening, we have to join forces. This time, I won't use the contract to bind you in any way. After it's done, everything you get, all the relics of Publius, and even anything that belongs to me can be given to you. If you're still dissatisfied with me, it doesn't matter if you want to betray me. However, I believe that above the current Helios, we're each other's only choice. You're right. Well said. It's a pity that I'm not interested in your empty promises at all. Huaishur was still cold and unmoved. But you won't let the followers of the Pied Piper carry out their conspiracy in front of your eyes either, will you? Garland said. Our interests are the same. We don't need to be friends. We just have a common enemy. He said, even if it's just this, I believe that we already have the foundation to join forces. In the silence, Huaishur looked at him silently and didn't speak. After a long time, he laughed mockingly. He had to admit that this old man had grasped his bottom line and was well aware of his choice. Garland might be more suitable to be an intermediary or a broker than an alchemist. He could always come up with reasons that others couldn't refuse. He could always control the situation, see the most important things clearly, and control the rhythm. He could always make others run in circles. He could always succeed. I have to admit that what you said makes a lot of sense. Your proposal is very wise. Your determination is admirable, and you've successfully convinced me. Huaisha raised his hand and applauded in admiration, but his eyes didn't waver. He just looked at him calmly. He told the old man in front of him, I can form an alliance with you, Your Excellency, just like the last time. But I don't need your empty promises, nor do I need you to answer any of my doubts and mysteries in alchemy. He said, I only have one question, and I need you to answer me directly. In the distance, amid the earth-shattering rumbles, Huaisha stared at the old man in front of him and asked word by word, Now, in front of me, the Grand Master who wants to form an alliance with me. Is it Publius or Garland? Behind him, Bichimos raised his scarlet eyes, no longer concealing his hunger and thirst for food. Behind him, the lightning radiance of water hate rose from his hand. Regardless of whether it was the origin substance incarnations behind them, the Paradise Guards, or even the Lizardmen army, all of them were coldly looking in his direction. They were waiting for his answer, the answer that would determine whether he was friend or foe. Behind the old man, Rachel was frozen in place, dazed. He stared blankly at the old man beside him and Huaisha across from him. He didn't understand at all. What were they talking about? Who exactly are you? Huaisha looked indifferently at the old man in front of him. Your Excellency, answer me. Who exactly are you? I am Garland Van Herman. The old man raised his hand and once again raised the contract in his hand. Do you have any questions about my identity? Why, sure. Or do you think that Publius can impersonate me? Huaisha laughed softly. I don't have to worry about that. Publius might not be able to impersonate Garland, but Garland might be able to impersonate Publius, right? He paused for a moment, then asked curiously, However, is it convenient for you to show us the inheritance of the blessed Herman family? Legend has it that a single drop of your blood can expel all poisons and evil spirits. I forgot that you have a blood fever. What a coincidence, isn't it? Huaisha shrugged sympathetically. A legendary bloodline was actually destroyed by an illness in alchemy. What a pity. The heavens are truly unkind to you. What a pity. Garland remained silent. He didn't say anything, but at the same time, he didn't refute. I've always been curious about one thing. Huaisha held the water hatred in his hand, his smile growing more and more cheerful. It's about the rules and decrees of Helios, in order to protect the technology and power left behind by the gods. All alchemists born in Helios can't leave for the rest of their lives. Alchemists who come from outside can only stay for 70 years. They can either die after 70 years because they know too much, or they can leave Helios without knowing anything. At the same time, they have to accept the commandment to never tell anyone about anything above Helios. Old Mr. Garland, you are an outsider, so you are naturally free to come and go. But how did Publius leave Helios? Garland didn't say anything, but beside him, Rachel couldn't help but frown. It's just a decree. For a Grand Master, it's naturally easy to break it. There's always a way around it. Yes, that's what everyone thinks. Huaisha nodded. But there's another possibility, isn't there? He looked straight at the old man in front of him and asked again, What if, for Publius, there's no such thing as a rule that he can't leave? Why could Publius, the prisoner of Helios, come and go freely? Why would the skeleton of Publius think that he was a member of the Herman family? Why would Grandmaster Garland be so familiar with Helios? There were too many doubts and inconsistencies. All this time, Huaisha couldn't figure out what was going on. He once again recalled the principle of alchemy. If there was gain, there must be loss. Someone reminded me that the so-called price and result can be interchangeable. Sometimes the important thing isn't what you gain, but what you lose. Huaisher stared at the old man in front of him. And what did you lose, Your Excellency? Garland didn't say anything, and Huaisher had already found the answer. After eliminating all the impossible answers, there's only one truth. Huaisher raised his finger and pointed at the old man in front of him, announcing in a booming voice, Publius is your biological son, isn't he? Dead silence. A deathly silence suddenly descended. Everyone fell into a state of shock, dumbstruck. Even the old man, who had always maintained a calm expression, was stunned. Garland, Ragnar, Bichimos, at the side, the incarnation of wrath spat on the ground in disdain. That inference was too stupid. The embodiment of compassion nodded in agreement. That's true. Even Bichimos couldn't help but show a look of disdain. Ahem, I'm sorry. That was a slip of the tongue. Let's try again. Huaisher coughed awkwardly, trying hard to put on a serious expression. He raised his finger again and said, after eliminating all the impossible answers, it's really no need to test me anymore. Huaisher, there's no need to be deliberately mystifying. Garland interrupted his indirect questioning and told him without hiding anything, since you've seen Hecate's temple, you more or less have the answer in your heart, right? It's just like what you imagined, he answered frankly. That's right. Before I became Garland Van Herman, my name was Publius Augustus. Chapter 884. 210 years ago, Pubris, who was born in Helios, and Garland, who came from the present realm, met. Perhaps this was the intersection of their fates. Unfortunately, there was no turbulence, nor was there a moment when both sides knew at first glance that the other was their fated enemy. It was just a simple encounter. The alchemists from the present world came to Helios, and the alchemists of Helios entertained them with hospitality and bid farewell to the last group of guests who had arrived. From then on, they would spend a long 70 years together. For Pubris, Garland, an alchemist from the present realm, was too boring. He was unsmiling and uninteresting. For Garland, an existence like Pubris, who was too jumpy, was the real alien in the holy land of alchemists. He chattered incessantly and was extremely troublesome. It could be said that the two hated each other, but in order to cooperate on research topics and find out what each other was good at, the two sides had to maintain a peaceful and close relationship on the surface. They even had some secret cooperation that crossed the line. As the inheritor of the holy name of the Blessed Family, Garland violated the ban of the previous chief and secretly shared the books of the present realm with Pubris. In return, Pubris gave back the secrets of Helios. Both sides took what they needed. It was a good deal, but at the same time, it felt more and more like a taunt from fate. Pubris was clearly born in a holy land like Helios and inherited the bloodline of the Olympian gods. At the same time, he had a talent that was difficult for ordinary people to reach. But Pubris did not want to stay in a dry and monotonous place like Helios. He yearned for the prosperity of the present realm even in his dreams. And the alchemists from the present realm were limited by a short period of time. Due to their own identities and strict prohibitions, they were unable to pry into the true inheritance of Helios. It was like two frogs meeting in the dark. The frog at the bottom of the well wanted to go to the outside world, but the frog in the outside world wanted to stay in the well even in his dreams. They both lived in their own hell and another person's heaven at the same time. So they made an agreement and reached the final deal. We performed the elusive secret ritual, Garland explained calmly. Although it was stolen from Hecate's authority, it pointed to the domain of Demeter, the mother of the four seasons. In other words, it was a reversal of gains and losses. Under the witness and presiding over by their mutual friend, Hades, they exchanged the price of their fates. But unlike the others, they exchanged twice. The first exchange was for the loss, and the second exchange was gain. Garland told Huaishur, it wasn't just a simple exchange of our identities, but also a complete exchange of our destinies, talents, and even souls. Garland of the elusive secret was a complete exchange, the elusive secret ritual of the elusive secret too. From then on, Pubris became Garland, and Garland became Pubris. Wait, but if Garland was a Ellis Elusis future, Elus Elusis was Eleus Helios. Was Garen Ellis, was Elus Helion? How do you know who you are? Was it just a memory? If an apple had the shape of an orange, the structure of an orange, the taste of an orange, and even the shelf life and taste of an orange, then it should be an orange. It was just like the ship of Theseus. After the two ships exchanged their decks, rails, sails, equipment, and even crew members, other than changing records and a vague memory, it was no different from not changing at all. If that's the case, how can you say that you were once Pubris? Maybe you're just Garland with Pubris's memory. This is alchemy, isn't it? Why, sure. For the first time, a smile appeared on Garland's cold face. It was so calm, but it sent chills down one's spine. Sometimes what's important is not what you gain, but what you lose. Would ordinary iron that had turned into gold still be ordinary iron? Ordinary iron did not care. As long as it could become gold, that was enough. Philosophical speculations were never important in alchemy. The so-called replacement was just a process, and the most important thing was the result. As far as Pubris was concerned, this was the greatest creation and escape of his life. Long before he escaped from the lunar prison, he had already escaped from the cage of Helios' fate. From then on, their fates had been misaligned, like two intersecting straight lines entangling with each other before continuing in their original direction. What kind of entanglement had happened at that tiny intersection point? That was not important. What was important was that they had gotten the result they wanted. The funny thing was that the elusive secret instrument, which was originally a secret instrument used by devils and swindlers to steal the wealth and lives of others, had led to the birth of two great grandmasters by accident. Garland, who thirsted for alchemy, did not have an inheritance, while Pubris, who had an inheritance, did not have freedom. If they had not exchanged fates, they might not have been able to achieve anything. It was as absurd as winning the jackpot twice in a row, exchanging the future of a great grandmaster for the future of another great grandmaster. This time, it was a TP on the spot. But then, Huaishur could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. He finally realized the truly serious part of this problem. Using alchemy to interfere with fate was bound to abide by the rules of alchemy. There were gains and losses. Disasters and miracles were two sides of the same coin. Since the exchange of fates had led to the birth of two great grandmasters, it must have been accompanied by a price. But what is the price? Fate itself is the price. Why, sure, isn't it? Garland seemed to be smiling, so mocking. I am Garland. What I got was everything that Garland originally enjoyed: reputation, ability, specialty, experience, bloodline. As for Publilius, what he had obtained was a future that belonged to him. From hundreds of years ago, it was destined to be the future, which is what you see now, the present. Following his words, A blood-red flame soared into the sky in the distance. Finally, it clung to the edge of the sun. It touched the boundary of the gods. Clench! A hurricane swept over Helios. Amidst the roaring sound of the wind, ecstatic laughter could be heard. He had finally touched the edge of his dream. He had grasped his own fate. Even if this fate, this dream, this self was nothing more than a fake that he had obtained from someone else. From the very beginning, the existence named Puberus was the crystallization of the meticulous planning of the alchemists of Helios. It was a miracle created through genetics, source substance, hell's bloodline, and the secret instrument of fate. It could be said that he was an existence that was specially born for alchemy, the final result that was completed in order to satisfy the taboo wishes and goals in the hearts of the alchemists of Helios for generations. This was originally a secret that should have been hidden before the exchange. It was just like the signs of Garland's own blood fever and the many dark inheritances of the blessed family. But after both sides learned about it, they did not hesitate at all. It was as if Puberus did not care. Regarding this, the former Garland would gladly endure it. The so-called life, no matter how rich and colorful it is only a short 100 years. It will pass in the blink of an eye. When you come, you have nothing. When you leave quietly. In the end, you can't even keep a handful of ashes. It's too embarrassing. Compared to their own creations, the alchemists are too pitiful and lowly. The former Garland asked, "Don't you feel indignant?" He said, "I want to become an eternal object." But nothing in this world can last forever. This is the so-called life. As long as it's exciting enough, I don't think there's anything wrong with having an end point. Puberus shook his head. "You should know that even the gods can't be eternal. Then I'll become a god first." Garland said resolutely, "One day I'll be able to become immortal. So let's make an exchange, Puberus." The alchemist held his hand, his eyes shining with a fanatical light. "This way, I can become immortal, and you can be free." At that moment, Puberus realized that perhaps the alchemist was more worthy of everything that the name Puberus represented than he was. No, perhaps he had come for this. This was his destiny. At the same time, this was the price he had to pay. Thus, Puberus became Garland, and Garland became Puberus. Since then, it had been a long time. They walked on the path that once belonged to others, chasing after the results that they had dreamed of, no matter the hardship, torture, or anxiety. Even if they were trapped in a cage or in a quagmire, unable to extricate themselves, they wearily paid the price for their choices. But they had never regretted the deal that day. Until now. But what about you? Huaishur asked in return, "What's your price?" "I've already paid my share." "Huaishur, my debt was paid earlier than his, although it may not have been much lighter." Garland looked at him meaningfully. "Now it's your turn." Huaishur shook his head coldly. "I never owed you anything, and I've never asked for anything from fate that I didn't deserve." "Perhaps, but is that really the case?" Garland said, nonchalantly, "In Helios, the connection between cause and effect is far greater than in other places. Here, fate is a vector in a sealed flask. When a vector appears, a vector in the opposite direction will inevitably appear in order to return to balance. This is the essence of alchemy. There must be a trade-off when you gain something. You came to Helios for your own desires, and in the end, you stood on the opposite side of Puberus. Isn't this the price that both of you have to pay? You will gain a lot, but you will also lose a lot." Garland meaningfully repeated the prophecy from the old shaman, Yima. "But if you want to gain more or lose less, the solution is right in front of you." Along with his words, the hurricane whistled, and there was a constant roar. Rachel's face suddenly turned pale. This was because the terrifying shadows had emerged from the bone tower, under Hades' command, in the darkness that light could not illuminate. Countless aberration spirits, and a large group of hell that was born from the precipitate of the abyss had spread out in all directions. The first to bear the brunt of the attack was Huaishur, who had long been on the kill list. In front of the surging army of hell, Gallus sat on the golden and bone chariot and stared at the surging core in the distance. When he raised the scythe in his hand, countless ferocious shadows behind him roared and turned into a torrent rushing toward this place. As for Huaishur, who was sitting on the Sunmaker's throne, she looked up. Chapter 885. The ink-like darkness seemed to be endless. After regaining control of the situation, the countless hells that were cultivated on Helios naturally returned to his hands, turning into a frenzy that was enough to completely destroy all opponents. They're coming this way. Rachel screamed and subconsciously took a few steps back. He returned to Garland's side, hoping that the existence of the Grand Master could give him a little sense of security. But Garland still did not move. He just looked at Huaishur quietly, waiting for him to do something. Huaishur did not do anything. He just stood there. He allowed Hades' army to quickly approach, as if he did not care about those things at all. He just nodded. "Oh," he said, "I understand." Huaishur said that he understood. "Was there anything else?" "Nothing else?" "Then can you be quiet for a while? Don't scream anymore." But Rachel was still screaming. Huaishur sighed, raised his hand, and covered his ears. Even when Rachel stopped screaming, he did not put his hand down, because behind him, in the projection core of the Twilight Village, at the top of the furnace of eternal frost, in the alchemy fire that burned forever, a cold eye slowly opened. Looking down, he looked at the earth below. Then a ray of blazing light gushed out from the eye, accompanied by the sound of countless steel tremors bursting out, turning into a blazing light that penetrated the sky and earth. In the blink of an eye, it swept across the endless black tide. The light dissipated. Then terrifying flames rose from the earth. The horrifying heat spread and turned into a twisted wall of fire. In the blink of an eye, a tragic gap was plowed in the tens of thousands of soldiers. The stench and darkness rose into the dark sky shrouded by stars and quickly disappeared without a trace. Soon after, more stars rose from the earth, more steel, and more blazing light. As countless steel buildings flipped over, the war module was activated. The giant anti-aircraft cannons stood tall like a forest, slanted, and aimed at the sky, spewing flames. When those giant ballista-like cannonballs fell to the earth and turned into a storm of steel, the curse from the distant hell spread in all directions. Even after losing its eternal wind, power, precipitate tide, it still retained the terrifying power it had once stirred up in the War of the Worlds. True hell, not to mention true despair, the remodeling of the sky, the crystal of calamity created by the maintenance from the Grandmaster. The land of eternal dusk had arrived. The eternal frost furnace wasn't the only one who had to its geographical advantage. Even after being damaged, even though they had lost the Sunmaker, such astonishing the Twilight Village still showed its ferocious appearance and admired the the Grand
smoke
Master Mikhail,
rising from the countless
and the control of
chimneys
the Sunmaker's
in front of him.
successor.
The steel
Why,
roared
sure.
as it
Even though it
operated,
was only a
and the
scale that had
mechanical
arrived
operation
here,
that seemed
as
to be
long
able
as
to
it had enough
transform
energy,
the entire
it
world,
would still be an
actually
out-and-out
turned
war
the
machine.
entire world into
Now,
its own
death
array
and destruction
and
were
secret
falling from the
apparatus.
sky. Although it's a hellish technology, it still has considerable merits. It's really desirable. If you want to discuss the technology, we can talk about it later. Weisher looked over coldly. I've already shown my sincerity, Mr. Garland. Now it's your turn. Garland shook his head. I don't have something as convenient as the Land of Dusk, nor do I have martial arts achievements that can be compared to the King of Donbois. All I can give is a little help. As he spoke, he looked at Rachel beside him. Rachel's expression was conflicted for a moment, but he still held the box in his hand and stepped forward to present it to Weisher. What's this? The trick of hiding a sword in a fish intestine? How about changing it to a map? There was no need to open it at all. Weisher could feel what was in the box with just a glance. The aura and outline of metal, the shape of a sword. When the box was opened, the iron light that had been through the vicissitudes of life was revealed. But when Weisher reached out to pick it up, he could not feel the weight in it at all. It was like an illusion, but the miracle contained in it was genuine. The color of the blade was constantly changing, like a rainbow, and the tip of the sword had obvious traces of recasting, exuding a majestic and cold aura. What's this? Weisher asked. The sword of the present, the sword of gold, and the sword of joy, Garland said. This is an imitation I made based on the sword of Charlemagne of the Roman Empire, Joveus, but it also has the same effect and majesty as Charlemagne himself. The legendary holy sword that can command the sun, moon, and stars to revolve and move mountains and rivers? Weisher frowned. But it's not in the present. What's the use of making it? Give me a remote control of the present in the vast space. And it's the previous version of the remote control. How can you think of this? It's precisely because it's not in the present that it can be recreated so easily, isn't it? Garland said. Besides, its real effect is not to control the present, but to make the knights of Charlemagne obey your orders. Ha ha! Weisher laughed. Where am I going to find the knights of Charlemagne? In the tomb. Before he finished speaking, a brilliant flame appeared behind Garland, and an array of tens of thousands of people walked out of the void. Banners fluttered, an iron light swirled. Countless handsome war horses raised their eyes, and together with the paladins who descended from the void, they bowed their heads to the swordsmen in front of them. They offered their loyalty. Right at the front, in the middle of the 12 solemn and mighty knights, a middle-aged knight with a cold face put his hand on his chest and saluted. At your service, your majesty, the 12 paladins of Charlemagne, the legendary paladins, and the 3,100 members of the Knights of Charlemagne. These are all the legions that I have created. Now, I'm handing them over to you. Weisher. Garland knocked on his cane, and the tower that belonged to him in the distance glowed and roared. Suddenly, countless pieces of land were merged under the eternal frost furnace. Then, countless cables that danced like snakes extended from Garland's tower and connected to every port of the Twilight Village. A terrifying amount of heat was poured into the eternal frost furnace, as if an endless amount of energy was squandered, causing the flames of the eternal frost furnace to become more and more violent. With Mikhail in between, Garland began to operate and modify the secret ritual of the Twilight Village on his own. Under Garland's control, the land of the Twilight Village continued to bulge, sink, shrink, and expand, like a constantly changing machine that was constantly evolving. It changed its appearance in just a few minutes. There were even many patented secret apparatuses that were unique to the Stone Cauldron Society, which made the burning and forging of the eternal frost furnace faster and faster. If it was an ancient fortress that stood high above the mountains and was difficult to conquer before, then now it had become a behemoth shrouded in clouds and fog, making it difficult to see its true outline. It was becoming more and more unpredictable. After the efficiency increased by 12%, the energy consumption was reduced by 20%. Mikhail is used to the large-scale structure, but he still neglected the details of the operation. With such a long distance, the changes are naturally delayed, Garland commented faintly. He's still too young. TSK? Someone's sneer seemed to be heard in the wind, but no one refuted it. In front of the few oldest grandmasters in the whole realm, who was not a young man. Besides, both sides had different specialties, so there was nothing to say. Garland had focused on the forging of the stigmata for so many years, so he was naturally good at doing delicate work. But asking his old arms and legs to preside over large-scale alchemy and group alchemy? Then Garland's fingers tapped repeatedly as countless plots connected. The tower that belonged to him appeared out of thin air in the territory of the Twilight Village. The projection of the Twilight Village suddenly shook, and countless rays of iron light burst forth. The originally faintly illusory silhouette suddenly became completely solid. With a Grand Master who knew Helios like the back of his hand as an important fulcrum, the Twilight Village at this moment was equivalent to having two Grand Masters maintaining it together. In an instant, it took root in Helios and was indestructible. Then, one tower after another rose from the ground. Obviously, with Mikhail's permission, all the alchemists who had signed a contract with Garland had their towers moved over from the large group of attacks in Hell. Then, they were instantly unified into the Twilight Village, with layers of restrictions and restrictions becoming the important fulcrum of Mikhail's group alchemy. And all of a sudden, the alchemists had mixed feelings about being under someone else's roof. If they relied on Garland, they could still comfort themselves. After all, he was a Grand Master, and it was not shameful to rely on him. But now it was Huaishur and the others. They had no choice. What else could they do when they were under someone else's roof? If they couldn't, they would have to take on Hades's counterattack by themselves. There were so many hordes of hell and the army of aberrations, and their ashes would be scattered by them. Obviously, they had received Garland's instructions in advance, and there was also the contract. A wise man submits to circumstances. It was good enough that they could stay alive, so why would they still want to rely on others? There was no need for Huaishur to instruct them, and they accepted Mikhail's deployment without any resistance, throwing themselves into the operation of the Twilight Village. In the crowd, old Lady Yima held her bronze staff and nodded slightly to Huaishur, then quickly disappeared under her own obelisk. She looked a little better, although there were more than a dozen long nails and secret instruments on her body. The symptoms of the aberration of divinity had dissipated a lot. She had achieved her purpose of coming to Helios, but she did not know what price she had paid. In this way, under Huaishur's perplexed gaze, Garland threw almost all his gains in Helios in one breath, including all his subordinates and plots of land, including a large amount of divinity. He was not worried at all that Huaishur would betray him. Next, I will do my best to interfere with Pubris's secret instrument, and the rest will be up to you. Garland finally said, "You decide what to do, and the others will cooperate with you. Don't disturb me." You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.